Hey guys, tonight you find yourself standing in the grey hush before dawn, where cold stone presses its chill through the soles of your boots and the air tastes faintly of wet earth, wood smoke, and the sour memory of yesterday's rain. Above you, soot-black rafters hold on to the last of the night, and below, the rushes strewn across the floor have long since given up any ambition of being fresh. A thread of smoke curls from the hearth, wandering lazily past hanging herbs and a fur-lined cloak that never quite dries in this weather. Somewhere beyond the walls, a horse stamps in its stall, and from farther off still comes the soft, measured tolling of monastery bells, rolling through river mist like a reminder that time here belongs less to you than to stone towers and patient men in wool. Medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience. You arrive expecting romance and birdsong, and instead you get numb fingers, damp hay, and a draught that seems personally offended by your existence. You probably would not last a week out here, though to be fair, neither would most people who complain when a room is slightly below perfect comfort and the bread is not artisanal enough. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, comment your location and local time, so that somewhere between these bells and these garden walls, this sleepy little medieval hour can stretch out across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand for another moment in the half-dark of the gardener's lodging, wrapped in the rough scratch of wool and the stubborn ache of sleep not quite finished. The room around you is little more than a corner claimed near a service building on the edge of a great enclosed garden, though great in the medieval sense often means less splendid than simply useful. It is attached to the outer side of a priory wall, where stone keeps out some of the wind and very little else. An oaken chest squats by the wall, iron-bound and heavy, holding seed sacks, twine, a whetstone, and a small wax tablet marked with planting notes. No one besides you can read easily now, since yesterday's drizzle blurred the neat lines into tired grooves. Beside it rests a shovel, a fork of ashwood polished by years of hands, and a hoe with a blade that has outlived at least 2 handles and, some swear, 1 owner. You rub your palms together and breathe into them, watching your breath rise pale in the dimness. The day has not begun in the sense that daylight has arrived, but it has begun in the stricter sense that work is waiting. In this world, gardens do not stir themselves awake. Beds must be checked, seedlings covered, water drawn, paths cleared, and the cabbage leaves inspected for the endless small hungers of things that creep, crawl, peck, or simply rot from spite. The bells have rung prime not long ago, and though you are no monk, the sound governs you all the same. Time in a medieval place is kept less by clocks than by repetition bells. Prayer, fire, hunger, weather, and the long argument between the earth and the people trying to persuade it to feed them. You push open the door, and the morning meets you with a breath of cold so clean and damp it seems almost silver. The sky is still more charcoal than blue, though one band at the eastern edge has begun to thin. The garden lies ahead within low walls and wattled divisions, every bed edged in shadow, every bare branch beaded with mist. Beyond the kitchen plots, orchard trees stand patient and black against the paling light. Pear, apple, a few plum if the frost has been merciful. No one can quite agree whether an orchard listens better when praised or threatened, but you have heard both attempted with equal sincerity. Your boots press into the path, damp with old straw and fresh mud. To your left is the herb patch nearest the priory kitchens, where sage and parsley crouch low and fragrant even in the chill. To your right runs a narrow channel dug for runoff, lined with stones slick as fishbacks. Someone has laid fresh rushes near the doorway to keep the worst of the mud from coming in and out, but it is already a losing battle. Mud in a medieval morning is like tax collectors or sermons, unavoidable and longer than you hoped. You start with the simplest task, because the body always prefers a gentle treaty before hard labour. Along the nearest bed you crouch and pull back a covering of old straw from a row of small winter greens. Their leaves are dark and tender, trembling under droplets of night water. A few have yellowed at the edges, a few are bitten. That is the ordinary account of things. You touch the soil, and it answers cold but not frozen, which is a mercy. The gardener's trade is made mostly of these tiny judgments: too wet, too dry, too early, too late, enough, not enough, perhaps. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether gardening is a science, a craft, or simply a habit of hopeful worrying. The priory wall rises beside the beds, old stone patched in places with newer mortar. Ivy clings low to one corner. Near the gate hangs a little carved image of a saint, darkened by weather, placed there by some past brother who believed the cabbages deserved spiritual protection, or perhaps knew the gardeners did. Medieval people are practical in ways that circle back into mystery. If slugs eat your lettuce, you pick them off. If blight creeps over the beans, you pray. If a child has a cough, you brew thyme and honey and also tie a charm to the bedpost. No contradiction troubles anyone much. The world is full of causes seen and unseen, and only a fool bets entirely against either. From an upper window of the priory comes the flutter of candlelight. Somewhere within, a sleepy brother is crossing a passage with a beeswax taper, perhaps on his way to a chilly chapel, perhaps only to check a pot left too near the fire. You smell baking from the kitchens not yet fully awake themselves, coarse bread warming, maybe oats, maybe yesterday's pottage loosened with water. It is a comforting smell, honest and unadorned. Nothing here arrives dressed for admiration. Bread is bread. Onions are onions, and a person is judged by whether they can mend a handle, carry a bucket without complaint, and keep watch against geese that have learned criminal methods. A dog appears at the edge of the path as if grown from the mist itself. It is a rangy thing of uncertain parentage and absolute confidence, with burrs in its tail and the manner of one who considers the entire priory his by ancestral right. You've seen him before, always at a distance, nosing around the midden or hovering near the kitchens for scraps. This morning he pauses, looks at you with an expression both solemn and faintly accusing, then sneezes. You nod to him as one labourer to another. He follows as you move farther into the plots. The eastern sky brightens by slow degrees, enough now to reveal the neat geometry of the enclosed garden. Here are rows for leeks, there onions, beyond them broad patches resting under dung and straw for spring work still to come. Near the centre stands a small wooden frame where peas will climb later in the year, though now it looks like the bare bones of something unfinished. The beds nearest the wall are warmer and better sheltered, so the more delicate herbs live there. Fennel, rue, lovage, hyssop. Some are for the pot, some for the physic chest, some for reasons passed down with lowered voice and raised brow. Some swear that rue planted by the doorway turns aside envy. Even now, it is hard to tell whether people cherish the plant for its bitter healing, or simply because they like the idea that something in the garden is standing guard besides the gardener. You reach the tool bench beneath a lean-to roof and run your hand over each familiar thing in order: shears, spade, basket, line, pruning knife. The ritual steadies you. There is comfort in objects that ask only to be used well. You choose the basket first and begin your slow round, gathering what the kitchen will need by sunrise. A handful of leeks, parsley, winter savoury, a few hardy greens spared from the cold. The leaves release their scent as your fingers brush them, sharp and clean and alive. This is the secret pleasure of the work, the one no one mentions when they speak grandly of manors and abbeys and noble tables. Before anything reaches the hall, before trenches are filled or potages stirred or sauces brightened, someone has to kneel in the dark with mud at the hem and cut herbs while the bells are still echoing. By the time the basket is half full, the mist has lifted enough to show the garden gate clearly. Beyond it lies a track leading toward the river meadow, and farther still, the road where pilgrims, drovers, merchants, and messengers pass when weather and luck allow. But for now the world remains small and enclosed. Stone wall, wet path, waking beds, dog at your heels, bell sounding again in the distance, patient as ever. You straighten slowly, feeling the tug in your back, and look over the quiet plots as dawn finally begins to unfasten the dark from the earth. This is how the day opens for you, not with fanfare, but with cold fingers, damp leaves, and the low, steady promise that if you tend this enclosed little world well enough, it may answer with green things, healing things, edible things, and small miracles no one ever quite learns to expect without doubting. The basket hangs from your arm, still damp along the wicker from the mist, and the dog continues after you with the solemn devotion of a creature who has appointed himself a guardian of all respectable gardening operations. Dawn is coming properly now, though in a medieval morning there is nothing abrupt about it. Light does not so much arrive as seep. It gathers slowly along the top of the priory wall, catches in the bare twigs of the orchard, and lays a pale wash over the furrows until every ridge of earth seems to breathe out the cold it has stored through the night. Frost lingers in silver flecks on the shaded edges of the beds, not thick enough to threaten much, but enough to remind you that spring, when it comes in these lands, usually does so with the temperament of a suspicious landlord. It offers just enough kindness to keep you hopeful, and then immediately changes its mind. You leave the basket under the lean-to for a moment and fetch the spade. This is no grand ceremonial gesture, no nobleman's hunt trumpet sounding over polished saddles. It is simply you, wool cloak tucked back, boots already muddier than seems fair. Leaning into the first turning of the day, the blade bites the ground with a dull, satisfying sound. Earth lifts, dark and wet beneath the chilled crust, and the smell rises at once rich, mineral, faintly sour. The deep old smell of life being rearranged. A gardener learns to love this scent in the way monks love beeswax or bakers love warm crust. It is the promise hidden beneath the labour, the quiet assurance that under this cold skin the ground is not dead, only waiting. You work a narrow bed near the wall, one that needs loosening before the next sowing. The motion settles into you quickly press, lift, turn, step, press, lift, turn, step. Before long your hands warm despite the cold, and your shoulders find the old rhythm they know better than rest. Bells ring again from the priory chapel, smaller now in the growing morning, and you pause only long enough to lean on the spade and listen. The sound travels strangely through mist. It seems at once far off and very near, as though the air itself has become a hollow vessel made to carry bronze. For those behind the chapel walls, the bell marks an office, a prayer, a psalm spoken into dawn. For you, it marks how much time remains before the kitchens want more herbs, before a lay brother comes to ask whether the bean poles are ready, before someone remembers the orchard ditch needs clearing and decides that your back is the obvious answer. No one can quite agree whether bells improve the growth of plants. Some swear that cabbages nearest a chapel tower grow tighter and sweeter, because holy sound makes orderly vegetables. Others say that is nonsense spoken by people who have never had to weed a kitchen plot in sleet. You've seen fine leeks near abbeys, and fine leeks in villages where the only ringing comes from a blacksmith's hammer, so you reserve judgment. Still, there is something about a bell in the morning that gives shape to labour. Without it, dawn might sprawl endlessly. With it, the day steps neatly into place, even when the boots doing the stepping are wet through. The dog has taken to circling the disturbed soil in the belief that anything turned over by human effort may contain either food or thrilling scandal. Now and then he sniffs with exaggerated seriousness, then sneezes bits of earth from his nose. You tell him he is a poor assistant. He ignores you with professional dignity. A pair of rooks drop into the orchard beyond, black against the whitening sky, and begin their own inspection of the ground. Rooks are clever, suspicious, and entirely too interested in anything you are planting. If they ever learn how to invoice for services, the rest of medieval society will be finished. By full morning light, the geometry of the garden grows clear and less dreamlike. Low wattle fences divide the sections. The kitchen plots lie closest to the service doors, sensible and blunt in their purpose. The physic beds, where useful herbs are kept for healing, sit farther in, better sheltered. Each narrow patch labelled in a script only half the household can read, and fewer still entirely trust. Beyond that, the orchard and soft fruit canes form a quieter border, a place where the air seems always slightly different, touched by sweetness even before the fruit is there. A path of trampled earth runs between everything, patched in places with straw, though the straw has become so mixed with mud that it mostly serves to make the mud look organised. You move from digging to inspection, carrying the hoe across your shoulder and walking the length of the beds with the careful eye of someone who knows how much disaster can begin in small silence. Leaves curl here where the cold bit harder in the night. A row of onions has come through well enough, their green tips sharp against the brown earth. The garlic looks sturdy, which is good news for the kitchen, and even better news for anyone who believes, as many do, that garlic keeps away more than hunger. Some say it turns aside fevers. Some say evil spirits dislike the smell. Some say evil spirits are no more offended by garlic than anyone else in a crowded winter hall. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, but nobody seems eager to test the matter by throwing the garlic away. At the far end of one bed you kneel to pinch out a nest of tiny weeds daring to appear before their betters. It is astonishing how quickly unwanted things arrive. Crops need careful timing, good ground, proper weather, watchfulness, dung, and patience. Weeds, by contrast, seem to thrive on spite and opportunity. You pull them free and flick them aside, then rake the surface lightly to break the thin crust left by the cold. The soil darkens where the tines pass, neat as combed wool. Behind you a side door opens in the priory wall and one of the younger brothers emerges carrying a wooden bucket. He is pale in the cheeks, ink stained on 2 fingers, and still looks as though part of him remains asleep in a manuscript somewhere. Not all monks are made for gardens, just as not all gardeners are made for manuscripts. He nods, blinks at the cold, and crosses toward the well with the resigned gait of a man sent on an errand by someone warmer than himself. "Hard frost," he asks. because even cloistered men understand that weather is one of the few conversations always worth having. Not hard, you say, enough to keep the earth honest. He considers this with the gravity of a scholar receiving a useful gloss. Brother Martin says the east bed should be dusted with ash. Brother Martin says many things. At that he smiles, which suggests Brother Martin says them to everyone. The young monk lowers the bucket into the well, the rope rasping softly over stone. He also says beans sown on the wrong saint's day grow crooked. You straighten and rest your hands on the hoe. Beans grow crooked because they are beans. He laughs quietly, glancing over his shoulder as though someone might object to such irreverence. Yet he does not quite reject Brother Martin's warning either, because that is the way of the age. A person may believe in drainage, and also in auspicious feast days. One may sharpen a blade and mutter a charm. One may copy Aristotle by candlelight and still avoid whistling at twilight, because some old nurse insisted it attracts troublesome things from the hedgerows. When the monk goes back inside with his water, you continue toward the outer plots where the ground lies more exposed. Here the frost remains longest, silvering the clods and stiffening the edges of the last year's dead stems. You take up the rake and draw it gently over the surface to clear debris and open the top layer to the weak sun. In one corner, cabbage stumps from the previous season stand like blunt little posts, and beside them, the earth is marked by rabbit prints. You make a note in your head to mend the lower hurdle fence. Medieval life is full of repairs that begin as intentions. Fix gate, mend handle, patch cloak, rethatch shed, speak to cook about onions. Most survive only until the next urgent task arrives, waving its arms. Still, there is pleasure in the gradual revelation of the morning. The sky has turned from pewter to a thin, washed blue. Smoke rises from the kitchen chimney in a steadier line. Somewhere in the village beyond the priory lands, a cock has finally remembered his profession. The road outside the orchard wall begins to stir with the faintest signs of travel cart wheels far off. A voice, then another, blurred by distance. The world is waking section by section, like rooms opening one by one in a long cold house. You kneel again, this time beside a little patch of parsley that has weathered more than expected. Its leaves are curled and blunt with chill but alive. You brush away a crust of soil around the roots and whisper, not because you believe parsley requires encouragement, but because after enough seasons of planting and loss, one speaks to growing things almost by habit. Some swear plants know the voice of the one who tends them. Even now, it is hard to tell whether that is wisdom, wishfulness, or simply the result of too many people spending long hours alone with beans. The dog, finding no worms of suitable interest, flops beside the path and watches you with an expression usually seen on old reeves and mildly disappointed saints. You look over the beds once more, judging what must be done before noon and what can wait until the sun has softened the frost entirely. Turn the remaining strip by the wall, check the onion patch again, carry ash to the damp corner, lay fresh straw where the path has become a bog. None of it is dramatic, none of it sings. And yet this is how the day builds itself one bed, one tool, one bell, one careful decision at a time. You take up the spade again and return to the bare earth, the metal dull in the pale light, your breath no longer misting quite so thickly. Around you the garden gives up its night slowly and without complaint. Frost yields, soil loosens, bells fade and return. And you, in the middle of it all, work on with the steady patience of someone who knows that most of life in this century is not won by grand gestures, but by showing up before the sun, trusting your hands, and persuading cold ground to become generous again. By the time the frost begins to loosen its grip properly, the garden has taken on the plain, honest look it wears in full morning. Nothing is hidden now. The mist has thinned into a faint brightness above the walls. The orchard branches stand bare and exact, and every row shows itself as it truly is, promising in places, disappointing in others, and in need of more work than seems strictly courteous. You set the spade back under the lean-to, wipe your palms on the rough front of your tunic, and turn toward the oaken chest where the seeds are kept. There is always something quietly ceremonial about this part of the day, though no one would ever say so aloud for fear of sounding fanciful. Seeds do not look grand enough to earn ceremony. They're too small, too dry, too easy to spill. Yet in a medieval garden they hold the shape of months not yet lived. Whole suppers, winter stores, market exchanges, herbs for fevers, onions for pottage, leeks for fasting days, fennel for digestion, parsley for sauces, beans for hard seasons. All of it sits first in little sacks and folded papers and leather pouches that smell faintly of dust, wool, and last year's hope. You kneel by the chest and lift the lid. The iron hinges creak in the cold. Inside lies the patient treasury of the gardener's trade seed packets wrapped in scraps of cloth, bundles of twine, a small horn spoon, labels cut from thin wood, a lump of chalk, a bone-handled knife, and a wax tablet with its blurred notes pressed into the surface. The dog raises his head as though suspecting food and is disappointed by agriculture once again. You choose the onion seed first, then the leek seed, each tucked into its own little bag and marked with a plain notch pattern, because ink is precious, and not every hand can be trusted to keep words dry. You pour a little of the onion seed into your palm. It looks like almost nothing. Little dark flakes and points light enough to ride a draught. And yet this is how much of medieval life operates on faith in tiny things. A relic in a chapel, a bee in a hive, a pinch of dried herb, a whispered blessing over a field. Some swear that seeds keep better if stored with a sprig of rosemary, because rosemary drives away spoilage and bad luck alike. Others insist that seed saved during a waxing moon has more vigour in it. No one can quite agree whether either claim is true, but people repeat them with the confidence reserved for old ideas that have survived too long to be questioned politely. You carry the seed pouch to a narrow bed near the south wall, where the earth has been worked loose and raked fine. Here the stones hold warmth longer once the sun climbs, and delicate starts have a better chance of behaving like sensible plants rather than sulking at the weather. You crouch low and draw the drill with your finger first, then deepen it lightly with the tip of the hoe. It is steady, exact work, too shallow, and the birds will have your breakfast before it grows, too deep. And the seed will sit there in the dark reconsidering its life choices. Medieval gardening offers many chances for humility, usually delivered by rain, rot, or things with beaks. You begin to sow, pinching the seed between finger and thumb and letting it fall in a thin measured line. Not too thickly, never too thickly. A greedy sowing wastes both seed and later labour, because crowded plants grow weak and ask to be thinned with all the drama of a family inheritance dispute. You move slowly along the row, shoulders bent, cloak falling forward, eyes fixed on the little dark trail disappearing into the earth. The whole garden seems to quiet around this task, even the dog, perhaps sensing that your attention is occupied by matters of consequence, settles beside the path and stops trying to inspect your elbow. When the line is done, you cover the seed with the gentlest brushing of soil and press it lightly with the flat of your palm. There is a tenderness to it that surprises no one who has ever gardened and almost everyone who has not. Much of the work is heavy, muddy, repetitive, and stern on the back, yet it also asks for this careful fingertips, measured spacing, patience with fragile beginnings. You have to be rough enough to turn the ground and gentle enough to trust what is barely there. A rook lands on the wall not 5 paces away and watches you with a shining black eye full of criminal interest. Not for you, you tell it. The rook tilts its head, unconvinced. Birds have always known exactly when humans are trying to establish order. It seems to encourage them. You wave an arm at it and it hops sideways with dignified insult, as though you're the rude one in this arrangement. Some gardeners hang bits of cloth, bones, or shells near newly sown beds to frighten birds away. Some swear by a dead crow hung from a pole, though you have never trusted the long-term diplomacy of insulting one crow in front of all the others. Rooks remember things. In another age, they would probably serve in manor courts and always win. You move on to the leek bed next, where the soil is finer still, broken well and freed from stones. Leeks require patience. They ask to be started, watched, thinned, lifted, replanted, earthed up, and fussed over in stages, which is precisely why kitchens love them, and gardeners occasionally speak of them through clenched teeth. Still, their usefulness is beyond argument, in pottage, in broth, with fish, with cheese. In fast-day dishes when meat is forbidden, and everyone grows imaginative with onions. You sow the seed carefully, leaving enough room for the young plants to show themselves before later transplanting. As you work, the priory wakes more fully around you. Service doors open and close. A boy passes with a bundle of split wood in both arms, and a face suggesting he has already been blamed for something. From the kitchens comes the knock of a ladle against a pot. Above, from some upper chamber, a shutter opens to admit the light. The world beyond the walls grows noisier too. A cart rattles on the road. Someone calls to a mule. A woman laughs sharply and then is lost to distance. Yet inside the garden the sound stays softened, caught in earth and leaf and old stone. You stand to stretch your back and look toward the herb patch. Sage, rue, fennel, hyssop, mint where it has once again attempted conquest. Herbs have their own temperaments, or so everyone says. Sage is wise and sturdy, rosemary loyal, mint unruly, fennel too fond of its own scent. Even now, it is hard to tell whether these are descriptions of plants or merely ways for tired people to keep themselves company while weeding. But names matter. Stories matter. A medieval garden is not only rows and produce, it is memory arranged in living form. This herb for headaches, that one for swollen joints, this for a stew, that one tied above a cradle to ward off envy. Here is lavender to sweeten linens if you are fortunate enough to own linens worth sweetening. Here is tansy, bitter and useful and trusted by some far more than seems wise. You fetch a small basket and begin sorting older seed from newer stores, checking each pouch with the caution of someone who knows failure sometimes begins months before anyone notices. Damp ruins everything. Mice ruin the rest. One little hole chewed into a bag can undo a season's neat intentions. You sniff, pinch, inspect. Bean seed from last harvest goes in one pouch, peas in another, cabbage seed, tiny as dust, parsnip, iffy and short-lived, lettuce, which rarely waits politely for perfect conditions and often decides to bolt when you least admire it. You set aside the weaker stores and make a mark on the wax tablet to save the best ground for the seed most likely to reward it. No one can quite agree whether speaking blessings over seed makes any difference, but nearly everyone does something of the kind, a sign of the cross, a muttered prayer to a local saint, a whispered hope too plain and practical to count as prayer, though perhaps heaven takes note of those as well. You do not make a ceremony of it. You simply pause with the pouch in your hand and let your thoughts settle into that old gardener's wish, let enough survive. Not abundance, not miracle, not glory. Enough to fill bowls, enough to dry and store, enough to carry the kitchen through lean weather, enough to spare a little for market or charity, enough to justify all these mornings of cold hands and bent shoulders. The dog rises and pads behind you as you cross to the onion bed again. Here you mark out the next row with twine stretched between two pegs, because a crooked line may still feed people, but it will annoy you every time you walk past it, and there are enough annoyances in life already without inviting geometric ones. You drop the seed with slower fingers now, taking care not to clump it. One careless motion can waste what took last year's sun, soil, and labour to produce. That is the discipline at the heart of the work. A medieval gardener cannot afford laziness disguised as confidence. Seeds are not endless. Time is not endless. Weather certainly is not reasonable. At the edge of the plot, you notice one of yesterday's coverings has slipped from a little herb bed, exposing tender starts to the cold morning air. You kneel at once to set it right, tucking the straw and matting more carefully this time, weighting the edges with stones. It is a small correction, easy to miss, and precisely the sort of thing on which a whole row may depend. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether success in gardening comes from skill or vigilance. You suspect it comes from remembering that the smallest neglect has excellent timing. When at last you straighten, the sun has climbed enough to lay a pale warmth along the priory wall. Not much, but enough for steam to begin rising from the darker soil where you turned it earlier. The garden smells richer now, less of frost and more of waking earth, crushed herb and damp wood. You tuck the remaining seed back into its pouch, brush the dirt from your knees, and glance over the fresh rows you have entrusted to the ground. For the moment they look like almost nothing at all, just lines in the soil, bare patches, work already vanishing into the earth that receives it without applause. But you know better than to ask for visible reward too soon. In this life, much depends on what cannot yet be seen. So you gather your tools, close the chest, and move on through the brightening morning, carrying with you the quiet satisfaction of having placed another small portion of the future under careful fingers. The seed chest is closed again, its iron latch set fast against damp and mice and the casual ruin of a careless morning, and already the next necessity has begun tugging at your sleeve. That is the nature of work here. One task never really ends so much as loosen its grip long enough for another to take hold. You stand for a moment in the widening light, looking over the newly sown rows, the raked beds, the paling sky above the priory wall, and then your attention turns, as it must, toward the well. Water is the plainest thing in the world until you have to fetch all of it by hand. The garden has no enchanted spring bubbling conveniently among the cabbages, no clever pipes humming beneath the ground, no cheerful servant of legend appearing with a bucket exactly when you need one. Instead, there is a stone well near the service yard, dark and deep and always a little colder than the air around it, with a worn lip polished smooth by years of ropes, palms, and urgency. The path there is already softening into mud where feet have passed since dawn. The dog follows you at a distance, then loses interest halfway, and sits down to examine a patch of sunlight as though it has personally invited him. You take up the yoke from beneath the lean-to, a simple thing of wood shaped to rest across the shoulders, with hooks for 2 buckets to balance the load. It never becomes pleasant, it only becomes familiar. The buckets themselves wait beside the wall, their staves swelling slightly in the damp, iron hoops mottled with old rust. You lift one, testing the handle. Sound enough. The other wobbles at the bottom, and you make a note to check it after the first run. Medieval life. You are learning again this morning is an endless series of things that sound enough for now. At the well, the stone is slick beneath your fingers. The younger monk from earlier has left the rope neatly coiled, which either means he is conscientious or he has once been shouted at by someone with very specific opinions about coiled rope. You lower the bucket and listen to the descent, the dry rasp of hemp, the hollow echo, then the distant slap and swallow as it hits the water below. The sound rises cool through the shaft. You haul it back hand over hand, feeling the weight gather, your shoulders and forearms waking to the argument. Water is obedient only after a great deal of complaint. When the bucket reaches the top, clear and shivering, you set it down and fill the first carrying pail, then the second, then again. The yoke settles across your shoulders with the old unpleasant truth of it, and you begin the walk back to the beds. Short, careful steps over the mud, the bucket swaying with every movement, each swing threatening to drench your boots or your dignity. The latter is in shorter supply. A medieval gardener spends much of life damp, bent, or carrying something heavier than seems spiritually necessary. The first need is the sheltered bed near the south wall, where the fine soil you worked earlier will dry more quickly once the sun gains confidence. Newly sown rows must be treated with care. Too hard a pour, and you wash the seed where it does not belong. Too little, and the earth crusts over with a kind of stubborn piety. You kneel with the bucket and dip out water in a smaller ladle, letting it fall gently along the lines. Dark bands spread through the soil, almost black at first. The settling into a rich brown that smells full and alive. There is pleasure in that change. Dry earth looks needy. Watered earth looks answered. You move next to the leeks and the herbs nearest the kitchen door, where parsley and winter savoury have begun to ask more clearly for drink. Each plant takes what it can and says nothing in return. A person in this century grows used to that arrangement. Still, you sometimes suspect the garden has moods. The mint certainly does. It advances every season with the confidence of a petty lord acquiring neighbouring property. Some swear mint must never be trusted near a wall or path because it creeps into cracks and stays there forever, which sounds less like botany and more like a warning about certain relatives. The sun is higher now, though still weak, and the cold has not entirely gone from the stones. From the kitchen yard comes the smell of smoke thickening into the day, carrying with it hints of onion and oat and the darker scent of yesterday's ashes being stirred. Somewhere a goose voices strong objections to the terms of existence. Somewhere else a cart rolls over ruts beyond the gate. Inside the garden, you make trip after trip from well to bed, each one measured by the pull in your shoulders and the soft, wet sound of water being poured where it is needed most. By the third journey you're properly warm despite the chill air. Cloak loosened, sleeves pushed back, you pass once more by the little trough near the herb patch, the one that catches overflow when the upper beds are watered. Its edges split slightly where the wood has dried and swollen too often in turn, and a slow leak is darkening the soil beneath it. Not a dramatic break, but enough to waste water and turn the path to soup by evening. You set down the buckets and crouch to inspect it. The crack runs along one stave near the base, no wider than a fingernail at first glance, though the seep tells the fuller story. This is the other half of gardening, the half no one praises in songs, not sowing, not harvest, mending, adjusting, rebinding, coaxing old things through one more season because wood, iron, and coin are all too hard won to replace lightly. You fetch the small knife and a length of cord from the bench, then a scrap of leather saved for just such annoyances. A little pitch would help, but there is none at hand, so you improvise with a sliver of waxed cloth and pressure. Press, bind. Win the cord tight, wedge the leather beneath, cinch again. It is not elegant, it is medieval, which is to say effective if not admired. The dog returns just in time to supervise the repair with complete uselessness. He sniffs the leaking water, drinks once from the puddle, then watches you tie the final knot as if considering whether to write a formal review. You tell him he contributes nothing. He blinks in the calm way of creatures who know humans say many things and mean few of them. No one can quite agree whether water drawn at first light is better for delicate plants than water drawn later in the day. Some insist dawn water carries the blessing of the cool hours and settles more kindly into the roots. Others say that is peasant poetry invented by people who do not enjoy hauling full buckets at noon. You suspect the plants are less particular than the storytellers. Even so, there is wisdom in the habit of early watering. The day is gentler then. The ground still listens. Once the trough is bound, you test it with a careful pour. The leak slows to almost nothing. Good enough. You shift the bucket and fill the channel properly, letting water run toward the smaller beds where fennel and rue are planted. Rue always seems to survive with the offended dignity of a saint who disapproves of everyone. Fennel lifts its soft fronds in the breeze, smelling sweet and anise sharp when touched. Beside them, sage sits low and grey-green, already sturdy, already carrying itself like an elder of the garden. In these herb beds the practical and the strange live very close together. One leaf for the cook-pot, one for the apothecary, one tucked into a pouch against bad air, one burned in a room where someone thinks a fever has eyes. A lay brother comes through the side gate carrying a basket of ash from the kitchen hearth, and pauses when he sees you at the trough. He is broad-handed, red-cheeked, and cheerful in the way of men who have accepted labour before breakfast as a permanent arrangement with heaven. Still holding, he asks, nodding at the repair, for now. He grins. Then it is nearly new. That is another medieval custom not often recorded by scribes if something does not collapse immediately. It is said to be mended. He tips a little ash at the edge of the damp path where the mud has thickened. Ash will help dry it, and later it can be worked into the soil besides. Nothing here goes entirely to waste if sense can prevent it. Even broken rushes become bedding. Even bedding becomes dung. Even dung, with enough patience, becomes supper in another form. The circle is less poetic when you stand in the middle of it, but very convincing. You resume your carrying, slower now, giving the shoulder a moment to settle between loads, from the well to the beds, from the beds to the trough, from the trough to the small patch by the orchard wall, where young herbs are trying their luck against the wind. Each journey leaves its mark, damp on the hem, rope burn at the palm, a pleasant heaviness in the arms, the sort of tiredness that comes not from rush or panic, but from repetition honestly met. At the orchard edge you pause to water a little pear sapling newly set in place last season, its bark pale and smooth, its buds just beginning to show. Fruit trees demand a different patience from kitchen herbs. A leek asks for months, a pear asks for years, sometimes longer than the one who plants it can entirely claim. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether that makes orchard work noble or foolish. You pour water slowly at the roots and think it is perhaps both. By now the sun reaches over the wall strongly enough to strike the well stones in white patches. Steam rises faintly from one of the darker beds. The garden no longer belongs to dawn. It has entered the day properly, with all the plain requirements that daylight reveals. There will be more hauling, more checking, more mending before noon is done. But for a moment, as you set down the empty bucket and straighten your back, you can see the difference your labour has made. Soil darkened, channels filled, trough patched, seed beds settled, little roots answered in their thirst. It is not grandeur. It is better. It is necessity met with your own two hands, rope-bitten and damp, under a sky that gives no promises. And in this century, on a calm day in the life of a gardener, that counts as a kind of quiet abundance. The last of the water settles into the beds, darkening the soil in long patient streaks, and you stand for a little while beside the patched trough, one hand resting on the yoke, listening to the garden breathe. By now the morning has lost its first silver edge. Light lies more warmly along the priory wall. The kitchen chimney gives off a steadier column of smoke, and the air has changed from biting to merely cool, which in this world counts as a notable improvement and not something to take for granted. Your shoulders ache in the agreeable way earned by useful labour, and your hands smell of rope, damp wood, and crushed fennel. The dog, having committed himself fully to accompanying you without helping, rises from his patch of sun and falls in beside you as you turn toward the orchard wall and the hives beyond. This outer edge of the garden feels different from the kitchen plots. Near the leeks and onions, everything is ruled by appetite and timing. Here, by the wall, usefulness takes on a softer face. Fruit trees spread their branches against stone that keeps and returns warmth. Gooseberry and currant canes tangle in disciplined rows, not wild exactly, but never entirely obedient either. A little strip of grass remains rough between the roots, starred with weeds that seem to believe themselves invited, and near the sunniest corner stand the beehives, squat and still from a distance, like modest monks keeping a vow of golden industry. You walk first among the trees, basket on your arm, pruning knife at your belt. Apples and pears and a few plums make up the orchard. Though orchard sounds grander than the reality of a walled strip of carefully cherished trees coaxed through bad winters, hungry pests, and the endless suspicion that a late frost will undo months of hope in a single cold night. Still, there is dignity here. The branches are bare enough to reveal their shape, each limb showing where it grew well and where it crossed foolishly against its neighbour. You pause before an old pear tree whose bark is rough and lichen-patched, and you lay your hand against the trunk as if greeting a senior acquaintance. No one can quite agree whether fruit trees prefer silence, songs, or stern lectures. Some swear an orchard prospers if spoken to kindly at dawn. Others insist a tree must be threatened a little in winter, or it grows lazy and fruits poorly. There are men who will tap an apple trunk with the back of an axe and warn it that if it does not yield this year, it may find itself in the fire. This always sounds to you less like horticulture and more like an argument between stubborn relatives. Yet old customs endure because they fit the rhythm of work. And besides, when one's prosperity depends partly on the behaviour of trees, one develops a flexible relationship with reason. You begin with the simplest pruning, removing a dead twig here, a crossing shoot there, trimming lightly where the branch has grown inward. The knife is sharp enough to bite cleanly, and the fresh cuts show pale against the darker wood. Each decision is small but matters. Too much pruning and the tree frets its strength away. Too little and it chokes itself in its own ambition. Medieval life is full of this balance enough, but not too much. Enough rain, enough dung in the beds. Enough saints in a church to be reassuring, but not so many relics that everyone grows suspicious. Some say the priory to the north once acquired 3 separate finger bones from the same saint, which is either a miracle or a problem in arithmetic. A breeze stirs along the wall, bringing the faint sweetness of damp moss and warming stone. Here the sheltered heat lingers better than in the open plots. The south-facing wall is the gardener's quiet accomplice, holding the morning sun and easing the chill from delicate corners. At its foot grow the more tender herbs and a few trained fruit branches tied flat against the masonry. Espaliered pears, patient and exact. A fig, too, in a particularly favoured nook. Though every winter it behaves as though martyrdom is imminent. You check the bindings where last year's twine has bitten into new growth and loosen one carefully, retie another, and tuck a wandering shoot back where it belongs. The dog sniffs among the roots of a currant bush and produces a suspicious noise at a beetle. From nearby comes a faint hum, almost too soft to notice at first. You turn toward the hives. There are 3 this year, dome-shaped skeps woven from straw and set upon low boards to keep them from ground damp. In cool weather they seem almost lifeless, but as the sun strengthens, the hum deepens. A few bees already drift in and out, tentative as sleepy scribes making their way to the desk. Bees are taken seriously here, with more reverence than many people receive and better reason than some. Honey sweetens feast days, soothes sore throats, enriches medicines, and spares noble tables from the full sadness of unsugared life. Wax gives light in churches and in the better chambers of the great, clean burning and fragrant, unlike tallow, which smokes and smells faintly of moral disappointment. A good hive is wealth in miniature, humming and golden. A failing hive is worry with wings. You crouch near the nearest skep, not too close, and watch the entrance. Bees creep out into the sunlight, pause as if remembering their duties, then rise and vanish over the wall or into the orchard. Some carry bright dust on their legs, others return already, zigzagging with offended concentration. Medieval beekeeping is half care and half superstition, like so many worthwhile things. Some swear bees must be told of every death in the household, or they will sicken, swarm, or abandon the hive from grief or insult. Some tie black ribbons to the skeps in mourning. Some tap the hive gently and speak the news as if addressing a small golden congregation. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the bees understand any of it. But people speak to them anyway, and the bees, with admirable composure, continue being bees. You inspect the coverings and the straw around the bases, making sure no damp has lingered too heavily. A hive that sits cold and wet is like a monk left in a draughty cell with bad soup. It may survive, but not cheerfully. One skep tilts slightly, and you nudge a flat stone beneath the board to set it right. Another has a frayed binding that will need tightening before long. You make a note. Though notes in your life are less elegant parchment records and more muttered promises to your future self, who is already overcommitted. From the orchard edge you gather a little fallen twigwood and clear last year's dead leaves from around the roots of the trees. Not all of them, never too neatly, because the earth benefits from cover and worms enjoy privacy, but enough to discourage rot and make room for the warmer days ahead. Beneath one tree you find a little stash of nutshells and gnawed apple skin hidden in the grass. Mousework, perhaps, or squirrel. The medieval world is full of small thieves, and most of them are furred. As the sun rises higher, the orchard begins to smell alive in a different way from the kitchen plots. Less raw earth, more sap and bark and sweetness waiting in the wood. You pass slowly among the trees, checking buds, scraping away a patch of lichen where it has thickened too much, pressing loose soil back around a root the frost lifted slightly. Near the wall, a patch of violets has opened early, their scent almost hidden until you kneel close. A rosemary bush nearby has survived winter better than expected, its leaves releasing sharp resin on your fingers when brushed. Rosemary is prized for memory, fidelity, and a dozen remedies of uncertain reliability. Some tuck it in chests against stale air. Some wear it at weddings. Some burn it in sick rooms. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether rosemary cures the body or merely comforts the frightened. But in a hard world, comfort counts for more than scholars admit. You take out the basket and begin gathering what the day allows: a little rosemary, some sage, a few sprigs of thyme from the warmer patch near the stone, and the first modest handful of bee balm leaves from a protected corner. Not much, only what can be spared. A medieval gardener lives under the law of restraint. Take too much from an herb bed too early, and you rob the week to feed the hour. Yet a little must always be brought in. Kitchens are never patient, and physic chests never stay full. At the far end of the wall you come to the small medicinal border where lavender, rue, and fennel stand alongside stranger companions: costmerry, southernwood, horehound, bitter as penance. Their scents mingle strangely in the warming air, sweet and medicinal at once. A person passing blindfolded through a medieval garden would think half the world is edible, and the other half determined to cure something. That is not entirely untrue. The line between food and medicine is thin here, sometimes no thicker than the cook's mood or the healer's confidence. A pair of bees drift around you as you cut a bruised stem from the lavender, and for a moment the whole garden seems to hold itself in an easy stillness. The wool warm at your back, the dogs stretched in the grass, the hum of the hives thickening, the faint knock of pots from the kitchen yard. No trumpet, no hurry, just this enclosed piece of the world slowly brightening under your care. You stand at last with a basket fuller now, touched with green and silver and the first good scents of the day, and you look back along the wall at what has been tended. Bindings loosened and retied, dead wood trimmed, hives checked, herbs gathered, sweetness, medicine, and future fruit all coaxed a little farther along by your hands. There is nothing dramatic in it. No one in the great hall will speak tonight of how well the pear branches were thinned, or how nobly the skeps were righted. They will simply enjoy honey when it comes, and herbs in the pot, and fruit when the season turns, as though such things arrive by divine habit alone. But you know better, and the bees know better, and the old wall holding the warmth of the sun knows better too. So you shift the basket on your arm, give the dog a nod to announce the next march of duty, and make your way back through the scented quiet, carrying with you the small, stubborn sweetness that a gardener must learn to draw from stone, weather, and patient ground. You come back from the orchard wall with your basket breathing out rosemary, thyme, and the sharp green scent of bruised fennel, and the garden already feels closer to noon than morning. The light has thickened, shadows shorten along the paths. Damp earth that only hours ago held the memory of frost now gives off a warmer smell, heavier and more settled, as though the whole enclosed place has relaxed its shoulders. Even the priory stones seem less severe under this gentler sun. You carry the gathered herbs toward the kitchen side of the garden, where usefulness becomes immediate and every green thing you have cut is only moments away from becoming broth, sauce, poultice, or argument. The service yard beyond the beds has woken fully. A boy passes with a stack of wooden trenchers held to his chest like a burdened saint. A kitchen woman in a wool kirtle steps out with steam following her like an impatient spirit, and empties a basin of rinse water onto the ash patch by the wall. Somewhere within, a cook is issuing instructions in the tone of a person who has lost faith in human timing but not in volume. Pottage is underway. You can smell it already: oats, onion, perhaps a little cabbage, perhaps a scrap of smoked fish if the household is fortunate today, or penitence is not being observed too strictly. In medieval life, lunch does not arrive as a surprise. It announces itself by smoke, clatter, and a smell strong enough to make every labourer within 20 paces suddenly remember the existence of hunger. You set the basket on a bench outside the kitchen door and begin sorting the herbs into little bundles savoury for the pot, sage for later, thyme for whatever the cook decides needs convincing, rosemary for both kitchen and infirmary if none of the brothers claim it first on behalf of memory, digestion, or mysterious scholarly requirements. The kitchen door opens behind you, and a broad-handed woman named Maud appears carrying a spoon the size of a weapon and the look of someone who has already rescued the day from other people's incompetence. "About time," she says, though not unkindly. You say that as if the herbs grew faster to please you. They ought to, given what we ask of them. This is not quite a joke and not quite a complaint, which places it squarely in the middle of the most medieval conversation. You pass her the bundles. She sniffs one, approves without ceremony, and jerks her chin toward the pot inside. Come warm your face before you go stiff in the yard. That is invitation enough. You duck through the low doorway and into the kitchen heat, where the world changes all at once from garden brightness to smoky dimness, from cool air to fragrant warmth. A fire burns in the broad hearth, and above it hangs the cauldron from a blackened iron hook. Steam rolls up into soot-dark rafters where cured herbs, strings of onions, and the occasional mysterious item of kitchen importance hang from beams beyond the reach of mice and common sense. Rushes lie scattered on the floor, fresher here than in your lodging, but not fresh enough to fool anyone. The room smells of grain, onion, old smoke, damp wool steaming dry, and that rich, unglamorous comfort that comes only from food, cooked in quantity for people who work. You stand near the hearth and hold out your hands, not because they are cold now, but because there is deep pleasure in warming them all the same. The firelight glows against the iron pot and along the edges of Maud's ladle as she stirs. A younger helper sits at the table cutting coarse bread, his fingers quick and slightly red from scrubbing leeks. At another bench lies a board dusted with flour, waiting for later. The whole room moves with practical rhythm. Nothing elegant. Everything necessary. Maud tears the savoury with her fingers and drops it into the pot. You've got the south wall bed in, then onions and leeks, and the bees awake enough to judge us. They do that, she says, smarter than geese, better company too. The helper at the bread gives a quiet laugh. Perhaps because geese have bitten him before and the memory remains active. Geese are widely disliked by people who know them well, which may be the strongest proof of medieval realism you're likely to encounter. Maud dips the ladle and pours a little pottage into a wooden bowl for you. It is thick rather than elegant. A humble brown gold stew of oats and vegetables with enough body to count as comfort. You take it with both hands and move to the bench near the wall, where the warmth of the fire reaches without the full assault of the smoke. The dog appears in the doorway almost at once, having detected through sorcery or greed that food exists nearby. He sits just outside, trying to look modest and therefore looking even more suspicious. You break a piece of coarse bread and dip it into the bowl. The first mouthful is simple and perfect in the way hungry people understand better than poets do. Warm, salty, soft from the oat, brightened by onion, the herbs just beginning to thread through it. No feast, but no one here expects a feast at midday. A gardener needs steadiness more than grandeur. Coarse bread, pottage, perhaps a little ale to make the water safer and the hours gentler. That is enough to keep a body moving from bell to bell. Around you the kitchen talk drifts in and out while you eat. A mention of a cart late from the mill, a muttered complaint about the store of onions running low despite your clear memory that the store was not low yesterday. A question about whether one of the brothers in the infirmary has recovered his appetite or merely wants better seasoning. Daily life here is made of such little exchanges, each one practical, none of them meaningless. The grand world of kings and battles and councils may exist somewhere beyond the priory wall, but within it the true empire is ruled by weather, bread, fuel, and whether the pottage catches at the bottom. No one can quite agree whether eating in silence improves digestion. Some say too much talk with a meal invites wind in the belly, which is both undignified and, in a crowded hall, memorable. Others insist cheerful company is as useful as mint or fennel. There are old women who swear a sprig of sage taken at noon keeps away fevers, and men who drink ale with crushed parsley, because some uncle once lived to a great age doing exactly that. The century is full of remedies that stand somewhere between wisdom and habit. You have learned to respect both, especially when they arrive in a bowl and smell better than uncertainty. Maud comes by again, wiping her hands on her apron. Brother Anselm was asking after Horehound this morning, for a cough for everyone. According to Brother Anselm, if the Last Judgment came tomorrow, he'd still ask whether Horehound might ease the throat of the trumpet angel. That seems considerate, she snorts, which in Maud's case means either laughter or contempt or both at once. The infirmary wants more fennel too, says the old porter has a belly like a drum. He had 3 bowls last night, and now he is surprised by consequence. This, more than sermons, may be the deepest medieval lesson people continue to behave as though their own choices are remarkable exceptions to ordinary cause and effect. Eat too much eel on a fast day, suffer, sleep in wet wool, cough, ignore your beans, lose your beans. Yet each fresh discomfort is greeted with the innocence of first discovery. You finish the pottage slowly, letting the warmth spread through your chest and limbs. Outside, the sun glows at the threshold, and the garden waits in that brief still hour when work pauses but does not stop. Midday is not true rest here, only a loosening of the grip. Backs uncurl, bowls empty, boots dry a little by the hearth. Someone laughs, someone rubs sore wrists, someone stares into the steam and thinks of the next necessary thing. It is enough. At the far table, the younger helper is sorting onion skins and peelings into a basket for the midden. Nothing is wasted, not the peel, not the ash, not the stale crusts softened later in broth. In a better season there may be cheese, on feast days there may be richer fare, perhaps fish, perhaps spiced dishes if the household is prosperous or trying to appear so. But on an ordinary day the food is plain and deeply tied to the garden outside. You can taste your morning in it. The savoury cut by the south wall, the leeks spared from the cold, the onion beds that must yield again and again if these kitchens are to keep their good temper. You tear off the last bit of bread and, after a glance toward the doorway, toss a corner to the dog. He catches it with such practised solemnity that you suspect prior experience in the field of pity. Maud pretends not to see. In most kitchens of the age, rules are firm until broken by sympathy, and then remembered only when the dog becomes ambitious. A lay brother enters carrying a little sack of dried peas and pauses near the hearth, blinking as his spectacles fog lightly in the heat. Ink stains mark the side of his thumb, even among prayers, accounts, and garden labour. Someone must keep tally of what remains. Winter storehouses do not fill themselves, and everyone grows devout when the grain looks thin. He nods to you and says, "The cellarer asks whether the kitchen garden can spare more parsley tomorrow." The garden can spare anything. Maud says before you answer, provided it is first grown, protected, cut, brought in, sorted, and not eaten by rabbits, birds, monks, or weather. The lay brother takes this with the expression of a man who has accidentally stepped into a familiar trap. So, perhaps, you say, rescuing him. He nods with visible relief and escapes toward the pantry. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether monasteries are quieter than manors. From within the kitchen, you would never know either possessed much silence at all. Even prayerful places run on labour, appetite, inventory, and human impatience. The difference is mostly that complaints are phrased more carefully and ringing bells provide better punctuation. You rise at last from the bench, bowl empty, hands warmer, body settled into that pleasant heaviness that comes after honest food. Outside waits the afternoon with its herb beds, its weeding, its long patient tasks not dramatic enough for chronicles and too necessary to be ignored. You thank Maud, gather the few sprigs she has left aside for the infirmary, and step back into the sunlit yard where the smell of pottage clings to your sleeve. Behind you, the kitchen resumes its clatter and steam. Ahead, the garden lies bright and orderly and already asking more of you. But for this one small stretch of the day, you have had bread, warmth, herbs turned into comfort, and the sort of company that asks little beyond usefulness. In this century, that is a feast modest enough to trust. You step back out from the kitchen warmth with the last taste of pottage still lingering, and the day greets you in a brighter, steadier mood than the one it wore at dawn. The garden paths have dried a little where the sun reaches them, though the shaded places still hold damp like a grudge. The priory wall throws a pale heat now, and the herb beds nearest it seem to lean into that kindness with quiet gratitude. Your sleeves smell faintly of smoke and savoury. In your hand, the small bundle Maud set aside for the infirmary releases a sharper scent rosemary, a bit of sage, and the bitter edge of horehound that makes even the air around it seem medicinal. This part of the garden is different from the kitchen plots and the orchard border. Here the beds are narrower, more carefully ordered, edged with little markers of wood or broken tile scratched with names in Latin, French, or whatever version of certainty the last literate brother could manage before rain got to the ink. It is the physic garden, though no patch of earth ever entirely agrees to stay within one purpose. Herbs grown for healing are often eaten. Herbs grown for flavour are often brewed into cures. In a medieval place, the line between supper and medicine is little more than a change in tone of voice. You pass beneath the shadow of a small arch in the wall and into the warmest corner, where the ground has been set into tidy rectangles divided by paths of beaten earth and old straw. Sage stands silver-green and serious. Rue, narrow-leaved and bitter, gives off its stern scent when your sleeve brushes it. Fennel lifts its feathery tops with a softness that disguises how often it is called upon to settle rebellious stomachs. There is tansy too, golden later in the year but still mostly leaf now. And hyssop, thyme, mint kept in stern boundaries because given the chance it would annex the kingdom. No one can quite agree whether the physic garden heals because of the plants themselves, or because every remedy feels more convincing when gathered beside a wall, blessed by bells and old stone. Some swear the herbs grown nearest a monastery are stronger from all the prayers said within earshot. Others say prayer is admirable, but fever comes down more reliably for willow bark than psalms alone. Most sensible people choose both and spare themselves the argument. You kneel beside the sage first. Its leaves are thick with a fine softness, pale as old cloth. Sage is one of those plants everyone trusts, even when no one can explain precisely why beyond tradition and repeated usefulness. For sore throats, for heavy heads, for the pot, for the chest, for a poultice when someone insists a poultice is needed, which is often. You pinch off only what can be spared and lay it gently into the basket. The plant's scent rises warm and dry, clean in the noon air. Beside it grows rue, and rue is another matter entirely. Bitter, sharp, half healer and half warning. Some say it clears the sight, some say it drives off pestilence, some say it belongs in almost every serious remedy, while others refuse it except in tiny doses and mutter that too much rue will put a person in the ground faster than the disease. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, but they all speak of rue with the respect usually reserved for strict abbots and rivers in flood. You handle it carefully, cutting a little and no more. At the far bed, fennel sways in the light breeze, smelling sweet and green. You kneel to weed around its roots, working slowly so as not to disturb the soil more than needed. Weeds creep in here too, of course. Healing herbs do not attract a more moral variety of unwanted plant. Chickweed arrives cheerfully. Dandelion settles wherever it pleases. Grass threads its way between sage stems like an apology no one asked for. You pull each intruder by hand and shake the soil gently from the roots before tossing it into a basket for the goats or the midden. Even in a physic garden, much of wisdom is simply getting down close enough to notice what should not be there. A shadow falls across the path, and you look up to see Brother Anselm himself approaching from the priory door, carrying his robes with the slight impatience of a man who is forever on his way to improve somebody's condition. He is narrow-shouldered, red-eyed from too many candle-lit hours in the infirmary, and smells faintly of beeswax, vinegar, and dried herbs. His fingers are stained yellow at the tips from handling roots and leaves. If saints kept ledgers of coughs, he might have been one of them. "You have horehound?" he asks, not wasting time on greetings that illness has taught him to consider decorative. You lift the bundle, enough for a syrup, if you sweeten it heavily enough to convince the patient he is not being punished. Brother Anselm takes it with a grave nod. The porter says his chest rattles. The porter says many things when he wants honey. That is true, Anselm says. And for a moment the corners of his tired mouth move as though remembering a smile. Still, a little honey helps the medicine. A little honey helps most things. He glances down at the beds. The rue did well through the cold. It likes surviving out of spite, a useful virtue. That, too, may be one of the great principles of the century. Many worthy things survive not through gentleness but through a kind of disciplined stubbornness. Rue, monks, gardeners, oak doors, Lent. Brother Anselm crouches beside a bed of hyssop and touches one leaf thoughtfully. Brother Martin insists hyssop brewed with warm ale will mend a winter cough. Brother Martin also thinks beans know the calendar of saints. Brother Martin thinks many things. Some of them are even correct. He rises, tucking the herbs into the fold of his sleeve. Send more fennel later if you can spare it. The old porter's belly remains a theological puzzle. Then he has gone again into the priory shadow, trailing purpose behind him. You return to the bed and smile to yourself as you weed around the hyssop roots. In another age men might argue with books. Here they argue with plants, seasons, and one another's remedies, then meet in the middle over a cup of something bitter. You move on to mint, which has once again begun to push past its allotted patch like an ambitious official. Mint is useful. Yes, good for the breath, good in sauces, good in infusions, good for calming stomach complaints, and far too convinced of its own rights. You take the spade and cut a clean edge around the bed to keep it from wandering into the thyme. Medieval borders, whether between kingdoms or herbs, require constant maintenance and rarely stay agreed upon. Nearby grows lavender in a protected strip, not lush yet but promising. Its scent rises in faint sweet threads when touched. Lavender goes into linens when there are linens, into oils when there is oil, into pouches hung near beds, into the hands of those who prefer a room to smell less like human history. Some swear it eases sleep, some swear it keeps troublesome dreams at bay. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the peace comes from the herb itself or from the hope wrapped around it. But then, hope has always been one of the stronger ingredients in medicine. At the edge of one bed you notice a little charm tied to a stake, a scrap of red thread wound around a twig of rosemary, and a tiny carved cross no bigger than your thumb. Someone has placed it there recently. Not a monk, most likely, at least not openly. More likely one of the kitchen women or an old servant from the outer yard, hedging bets between the learned herbs and the older ways. Charms, prayers, herbs, saints' names, smoke, vinegar, and poultices all mingle easily here. The world is too uncertain for people to choose just one defence. When fever comes, no one wants to discover they were being unnecessarily philosophical. You leave the charm where it is, it harms nothing, and perhaps it comforts someone. That is enough. The sun leans warmly on the wall now, and bees from the hives drift lazily through the upper air. From farther off you hear the hollow strike of wood on wood, perhaps someone splitting kindling, perhaps a carpenter at the gatehouse mending a shutter. Then a bell rings again from the priory chapel, folding the hour gently over the garden like a page turned in a familiar book. You pause, straightening from the bed, one hand at the small ache in your back. The light has changed. Afternoon has begun its long, slow descent, though there is plenty of work still threaded through it. You gather more cuttings for the infirmary basket, a little sage, fennel fronds, hyssop, a few leaves of plantain from the edge where it has seeded itself, because plantain appears everywhere useful things happen, and therefore enjoys a strong reputation for bites, stings, sores, and swellings. Some say it can draw poison. Some say it simply gives the injured person confidence while time does the real work. Confidence, again, is not to be dismissed lightly. When the basket is nearly full, you carry it to the shaded bench beneath the wall and begin sorting the herbs into neat bundles tied with twine, one for coughs, one for digestion, one for drying later in the rafters if not needed at once. The scents rise around you, bitter, resinous, sweet, sharp, all mingling in the warm noon air until the bench itself seems like a little apothecary of the earth. Your fingers grow sticky with sap. A leaf clings to your sleeve. The dog reappears long enough to sniff the horehound scraps and decide that healing has no culinary future. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether a physic garden belongs more to the body or the soul. It eases fevers, settles bellies, sweetens rooms, calms minds, fills the air with signs that someone is trying against pain, trying against rot, trying against the many indignities of flesh and season. Perhaps that is enough to answer the question. You tie the last bundle and set it aside for Brother Anselm, then rise and look over the ordered beds once more. Sage trimmed, mint disciplined, weeds lifted, remedies gathered, quiet old belief still hanging in the warm air between plant and stone. The garden has not grown grander in the last hour, but it has grown more ready, and readiness is a kind of grace in this world. So you take up the basket and step back toward the brighter paths, carrying your little sheaf of cures and comforts through the afternoon light, while behind you the herb beds keep their secrets in green silence, and the wall holds the sun a little longer for all who need it. With the physic herbs bundled and left where Brother Anselm will find them, you move back into the brighter part of the garden, where the sun has turned the upper stones of the priory wall almost pale gold, and the paths smell of warming earth. The afternoon does not hurry. It stretches itself carefully across the enclosed ground, laying longer shadows beneath the orchard branches and drawing a dry sweetness from the straw at the bed edges. You carry your hoe in one hand, a basket for weeds in the other, and make your way toward the beds that run beneath the priory and manor-facing windows, where the work must be done low, slow, and with only as much noise as weeds absolutely require. This strip of garden lies in a curious place. It is not hidden, exactly, but half observed. Above it, high narrow windows look out from rooms where better-fed people read, account, pray, recover from fevers, or simply enjoy the warmth of stone walls thicker than any in your lodging. Sometimes shutters remain closed and all you see is blank wood and leaded glass catching light. Sometimes a window stands open a little. And then voices float down with the strange clarity that only comes when you're close enough to hear words, but not invited near enough to belong to them. You kneel at the first bed, where cabbages sit in solemn little ranks and onions push up in green points around them. The soil here is fine but already crusting at the top, so you loosen it lightly with the hoe, then go in with your fingers to pull the smaller weeds from between the stems. This is close work, the sort that makes the whole world shrink to leaf, root, soil, fingertip, chickweed again, dock seedlings, little threads of grass, nothing impressive. But left alone they would thicken into nuisance by week's end. Medieval disorder, like most disorder, begins with tiny things being politely ignored. Above you, from one of the upper chambers, comes the murmur of voices, a man speaking first, clipped and weary, perhaps the cellarer or steward, then another, softer, answering. You do not look up. Looking up too much while working below higher windows has a way of becoming memorable for the wrong reasons. Instead, you keep your eyes on the onions and listen without seeming to. Market tolls have risen again, the first voice says. A pause. Then the softer one, and the bridge road. Worse after the rain. 2 carts stuck near the mill ford. You press your thumb into the soil beside an onion root and ease out a weed in one smooth pull. Market tolls, roads, bridges, carts. These things decide the appetite of a household almost as much as gardens do. If roads fail, salt comes late. If carts sink, grain waits in fields or storehouses. If tolls rise, every onion feels more important. The world above your head may sound like accounts and administration, but down in the beds it all becomes very simple. Someone somewhere pays more. So someone here must waste less. A shutter taps lightly in the breeze, and another voice drifts down from farther along the wall, this time a woman's, amused and sharp. If the pears fail again, tell Brother Martin I shall blame his Saint's Day pruning. A second woman laughs. There is comfort in hearing that even inside stone rooms with finer stools and warmer blankets, people continue assigning blame for agricultural disappointment with complete confidence and very little evidence. No one can quite agree whether gardens do better when watched from noble windows. Some swear plants enjoy the dignity of high attention. Others say they only grow embarrassed. You suspect cabbages are indifferent to rank. Still, there is something faintly theatrical in working below those openings, bent among the roots while life above goes on in murmurs and cups and parchments and half-heard worries. The garden feeds them, and they consider it from above. You kneel in it and know exactly how much mud that arrangement requires. The dog appears, as usual, just when the work turns repetitive enough to invite commentary. He circles twice in the narrow strip between wall and bed, nearly treads on the basket, then settles with a sigh large enough to suggest he has personally been weeding all morning. You tell him he's doing poorly at remaining inconspicuous. He yawns between the two of you. Only one has dirt to show for the day, and it is not the one pretending to supervise. You move along the bed, weeding steadily beneath the windows. Here are leeks needing space at the base. Here parsley thick enough to thin a little for later use. Here a patch of beet greens just beginning to declare themselves. The sun falls warmly against your back, and for a while the world reduces itself to gentle labour and overheard fragments. From a half-open shutter comes the scratch of a quill on parchment, then the voice of a young brother reading numbers aloud with the flat resignation of a man who would rather be reading saints' lives or not reading anything at all. 4 sacks onions, 3 measures dried peas, 2 jars honey from the lower hives, though Brother Stephen says one was lighter than promised. A second voice answers, dry as old wood. Brother Stephen believes every jar is lighter than promised. You smile to yourself and keep pulling weeds, honey, onions, peas. All of it passes through hands like yours before it becomes entries in someone else's careful list. This is another truth of the age. There is always a written version of labour somewhere, and it is never as muddy as the real thing. At the edge of the next bed, you find snail damage on a few cabbage leaves, ragged and glistening where the afternoon warmth has woken slow appetites. You pinch one culprit off and flick it into the weed basket with little ceremony. Some gardeners crush snails on the spot. Some scatter ash. Some lay down little beer traps if enough ale can be spared, which rarely improves the gardener's mood. Some swear that hanging bits of wool over the bed draws snails away because they prefer a soft resting place. Even now, it is hard to tell whether that is true or whether someone once ran out of better ideas and spoke with confidence until the rest of the village adopted the practice. The windows above fall quiet for a time, and the silence feels oddly companionable. A breeze carries the smell of beeswax and old stone from indoors, mixed with the fresher scents of bruised parsley and damp soil below. You shift to the next strip and begin loosening the crust around a row of young beans just starting to show. Beans are delicate at first, then suddenly determined, then dramatic if cold touches them badly, much like certain novice monks, though the beans are less likely to complain in Latin. Farther along the wall, beneath a broader window with a little carved sill, the planting changes. Here the bed is more ornamental, though still useful. Sweet violets, lavender, a few early flowers tucked among herbs that can be cut for both table and chamber. Such beds exist partly because pleasant things are pleasant, and partly because even stern households enjoy the notion that usefulness might smell sweet. You kneel there to pull grass from between the violets, careful not to disturb the roots. The flowers are small, deep-coloured, almost hidden under their own leaves. When you brush them, their scent rises soft and unexpected, a reminder that beauty in this century usually arrives quietly, without fanfare, between chores. A shutter opens above with a gentle scrape. You hear the rustle of clothing, then a voice young, female. Perhaps someone serving in the guest chamber or some noble visitor kept resting after travel. Is that the gardener below? You keep your attention politely on the bed and answer without looking up too quickly. It is. Do the bees sting often? Only when they are offended. There is a pause. And what offends a bee? You consider this, pinching out a tuft of grass as you do, rough handling, sudden foolishness, smoke at the wrong time, probably gossip. A small laugh drifts down. Then they are wiser than most people. That is what I have observed. The shutter remains open for a few breaths longer, then closes softly. No more words follow, but the exchange leaves the afternoon a little warmer somehow, proof that the world above the beds is not entirely made of accounts and instructions. Sometimes it is only curiosity leaning out over a sill, asking how not to annoy bees. You continue with the work, easing thinnings from the parsley row and laying the good ones in a separate basket for the kitchens. Nothing wasted. The small leaves smell bright on your hands. A bell sounds again from the Priory Chapel, gentler now in the longer light, and you count the hour without meaning to. Time here enters through sound as much as sun. You always know the shape of the day by bells, hunger, shadows, and the ache in your back. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether gardeners belong to the household, the priory, or the soil itself. You're useful to all three and fully owned by none, which may be the nearest thing to freedom available in a place run on clocks without faces. Beneath these windows, that strange position feels especially clear. You hear the rooms above, yet remain outside them. You tend what feeds and sweetens them, yet return at night to your own smoky corner and damp rushes. Still, there is a certain peace in knowing your place exactly, even when it's low to the earth. By the time you finish the last stretch beneath the wall, your basket is full of weeds, snail shells, and trimmings, and the beds look newly clear, their plants standing with more room about them, their roots loosened, their leaves easier in the light. Above, the windows have gone mostly quiet again. Accounts, prayers, naps, readings, recoveries all continuing behind stone and shutter. Below, the garden continues too, needing nothing from speeches, only hands. You rise slowly and straighten your back, one palm pressed there for a moment while you look over the strip you've finished. Cabbages freed from their little thieves, beans given air, parsley thinned, flowers uncovered. It is modest work, invisible by supper time to nearly everyone who benefits from it. But that is the way of much that matters here. So you take up the basket and hoe, nod once to the silent windows as if to acknowledge a passing acquaintance, and move on into the afternoon, leaving behind a tidier ribbon of earth beneath the watchful wall, and carrying with you the half-heard murmur of higher lives that, for all their stone and parchment, still depend on the low green patience of a gardener's hands. The afternoon has begun to mellow by the time you leave the wall-side beds behind. The light is no longer climbing, it is settling. A softer gold gathers on the upper stones, and the whole garden seems to exhale after the close. Careful labour beneath the windows. You carry your basket of parsley thinnings and trimmings toward the service yard, where usefulness is measured less by beauty than by quantity, and where every bundle of green must soon answer the blunt question of who needs it and how much can be spared. This is the hour when the garden stops feeling like a quiet enclosed world and starts behaving like part of a larger machine. Kitchens want herbs, storehouses want counts, market baskets must be judged, not by sentiment, but by whether they are worth the walk and the toll and the bother. The earth may produce in patient silence, but everything after that involves hands, numbers, timing, and at least one person sighing over shortages. You set the basket down on the wooden bench outside the kitchen and begin sorting the usable cuttings from the rest. Fine parsley goes into one pile, small leeks, pulled from a crowded row earlier and still slender as quills, into another. A handful of onions from the edge bed, not large, but sound. A little bunch of thyme and savoury, nothing lavish. The garden is generous by degrees, not in spectacle. Yet gathered together, the day's offerings begin to look respectable enough, like the honest contents of a life that rarely boasts and still manages to feed people. A shadow falls across the bench, and you look up to find the cellarer himself standing there with a wax tablet in one hand and a look of practised concern in the other. He is a narrow-faced man with a belt full of keys and the cautious expression of someone who spends his days thinking in measures, jars, sacks, and what will happen when one of them runs low at the wrong moment, if abundance ever arrived at the priory gate. The cellarer would probably greet it by asking how long it intended to stay. "What have we today?" he asks. You gesture to the bench. Parsley, thyme, savoury, some young leeks, a few onions. More fennel later if the infirmary leaves any for the kitchen. He makes marks on the tablet with his stylus, pressing harder than seems necessary, as though he suspects the numbers of trying to escape, and the orchard, not yet. Herbs and pruning only. He nods, unsurprised. Fruit belongs to hope and later arguments. Green herbs belong to now. Maud says the kitchen may need extra onions tomorrow. Maud always says that. Yes, he says dryly, which is why I tend to believe her. That is the rhythm of the household in miniature. The cook asks. The cellarer worries. The gardener calculates. The weather ignores them all. Somewhere in the middle, supper appears and everyone acts as though this outcome had been certain from the start. You begin tying the smaller leeks into bundles with the twist of rush fibre, neat enough to stack, loose enough not to bruise them. The cellarer watches for a moment, then glances toward the gate that leads out toward the lane and the market road beyond. There is talk of traders in the square tomorrow, he says. Salt fish, coarse cloth, lamp oil, perhaps dried apples from the North Road if the carts came through. Then there will be tolls. There are always tolls. You both look toward the gate with the same mild resignation. Market days are useful, necessary, often lively, and never as simple as people in warmer rooms imagine. Someone must carry the goods, bargain over them, watch the scales, pay the fee to enter, pay another fee to stand, and return home pretending all this was a perfectly natural way to acquire turnips. No one can quite agree whether markets were invented for trade or for mutual irritation. Some swear a market square is the true heart of civilized life. Others say it is simply mud with shouting. Both views have merit. Still, a gardener cannot ignore markets. What the garden cannot provide must be bought, bartered, or regretted. What the garden can spare may travel there too, transformed from leaf and root into coin, favour, or a better winter. The cellarer moves off at last, taking his tablet and his anxieties with him. You continue sorting, making 3 little groups, one for the kitchen, one for the infirmary if requested, and one small basket for possible sale or exchange if the morrow proves worth the trouble. A few onions, a neat bundle of herbs, perhaps the parsley, if not all claimed first. Medieval abundance is often less a full cart than one decent basket carried with determination and realistic expectations. From inside the kitchen comes the familiar clatter of afternoon preparations, lids, ladles, chopping, Maud's voice correcting the universe. In the yard beyond, a boy is sweeping chaff from near the grain store with a futile hope of making a place governed by wind look orderly. 2 hens scratch near the midden. The dog, after a brief inspection of the leek bundles, decides once more that gardening offers too few edible developments, and wanders off in search of more promising incompetence elsewhere. You lift the small market basket and begin to line it with clean straw. Presentation matters, though not enough to become vain about. Herbs laid neatly look fresher. Onions stacked well seem more respectable. Buyers, like abbots and geese, are easier to deal with when given the illusion that things are under control. You nestle the little leeks side by side, tuck the herbs along one edge, and add the onions last. Their skins pale gold and papery in the afternoon light. A lay brother named Osric comes through the gate carrying an empty sack and pauses when he sees the basket. Off to market. Are we, perhaps tomorrow? He leans in to inspect the onions with exaggerated seriousness. Fine, warlike fellows. They are onions. Everything looks more important in a basket. He is not wrong. Arrange goods gather dignity quickly. 1 leek in the hand is merely a leek. 6 bound together become produce. 12 in a basket become inventory. 20 in a square, watched by frowning traders and suspicious wives, become politics. Osric sets down the sack and lowers his voice a little. I heard there's a tinker coming through, also a pilgrim seller with badges from the southern shrine. Then someone will buy a saint in tin and lose it in the mud before sunset. Not before paying too much for it, he says. Piety has a price. You smile and keep tying the herb bundles. Pilgrim badges, saints' tokens, bits of ribbon blessed somewhere doubtful, tiny ampulla said to hold holy oil or holy dust, or holy confidence markets draw all these things in alongside fish, beans, cheese, wool, and gossip. The sacred and the ordinary sit on neighbouring tables and eye one another without complaint. A person might buy onions, lamp oil, and a badge of St. Cuthbert all within the same muddy quarter hour. Then go home believing the day entirely sensible. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether pilgrims improve a market or merely complicate it. They bring coin, news, strange accents, and an appetite for food they did not have to grow. They also bring mud, rumours, and opinions about relics. Some say a market with pilgrims feels lively. Some say it smells different. Both are true. Once the basket is ready, you carry it to the cool side of the store shed where it will wait until morning judgment decides whether it travels. Near the door stand sacks of peas, a barrel of oats, and a row of jars sealed with waxed cloth. Winter stores, spring hopes, and current necessities all in one dark-smelling place. The shed breathes grain dust, wood, onion skin, and the faint sharpness of apples long since eaten, but not forgotten. You add your basket to the shelf and step back. Inside, the economy of the household reveals itself plainly. There is never enough to stop thinking about tomorrow, but often enough to get there. A few more herbs and the cook stays content. A few more onions and the fast days pass more kindly. A little honey, and Brother Anselm's cough remedies grow less punishing. 1 basket sold or exchanged well, and perhaps there is lamp oil enough not to waste tallow in the smaller rooms. Life here turns not on riches but on margin. You leave the shed and head toward the outer path where the garden meets the lane beyond the wall. Through the half-open gate you can see the road running toward the town, pale with dust where it dries and dark with ruts where it does not. Far off. A cart creaks by. A man with a pack-staff walks steadily westward, somewhere unseen. Someone is driving geese, and all the geese object at once. The wider world exists. Then, just beyond your ordered plots traders, toll-keepers, shrines, bridges, muddy squares, bargains struck over turnips and lampwicks. The garden feeds into that world in small ways, and it returns things in kind salt, Cloth, tools, rumours, sometimes trouble. Even now, it is hard to tell whether a medieval market is more about goods or information. A basket of onions may come home with news of a flood 2 valleys away, a noble marriage, a broken bridge, a shrine miracle, or a fever in the next town. Trade moves many things besides produce. In this age, gossip travels faster than carts and with fewer axle failures. You rest your hand against the gatepost and look back over the kitchen beds, the herb patch, the orchard wall catching the gentler light of late afternoon. Somewhere behind you Maud shouts for more water. Somewhere inside the priory a bell stirs. And here at the edge between garden and road, you feel the household's quiet dependents gather into view. This parsley may become supper. Those onions may buy lamp oil. Tomorrow's basket may return with salt fish, or not. The whole day's labour stretches outward in threads finer than twine. At last you turn from the gate and walk back toward the beds, because the garden is not done simply because the counting has begun. There are still rows to inspect, paths to tidy, evening tasks to settle before the light goes soft. But now the day has changed in your mind. The work is no longer only about leaf and soil and water. It has joined the larger web of need and exchange, of toll and basket and storehouse shelf. And so you move through the late afternoon carrying that knowledge lightly but firmly, that every herb tied, every onion counted, every small bundle laid in straw is not merely produce, but the household's quiet answer to hunger, trade, and the long practical demands of living in a world where even peace must be provisioned by hand. When you leave the store shed and step back into the garden proper, the day has begun its subtle turn. The light still holds, but it no longer feels like work's accomplice in the same eager way. It has softened. The warmth that gathered along the wall and over the beds during midday now lies thinner, easier to disturb. A breeze comes through the gate and carries with it the unmistakable smell of coming rain, wet stone before the wet, dark leaves. A cool iron scent rising from the earth as though the ground itself has caught wind of what approaches and is bracing quietly. You stop in the middle of the path and look up. Clouds have thickened over the western edge of the sky, low and grey, not dramatic enough to frighten anyone, but steady, broad, and purposeful. Medieval weather rarely bothers with a formal introduction. It simply arrives and expects the world to adapt. The dog reappears from whatever urgent conference of uselessness he's been attending and stands beside you, nose lifted, tail still. Even he seems to understand. Rain changes everything in a garden, though seldom in one direction only. It blesses, ruins, softens, swells, pounds, leaks, sinks, and saves. A gardener spends half a lifetime asking for it and the other half asking it to behave. The first task is the obvious one-tools. You cross quickly to the lean-to and begin gathering what must not be left in the open: hoe, rake, hand spade, the line pegs, the pruning knife returned to its slot, the basket turned upside down so it will not fill like a useless little pond. Wooden handles may survive wet, but not repeated neglect. Iron rusts, twine sours. A person learns to distrust any sentence that begins. It will probably be fine if left out. From the kitchen yard comes Maud's voice raised above the sound of shifting pots. Rain. Soon. You call back. Then the woodpile's cursed. It likely is. Not by sorcery, though no one would entirely rule that out, but by placement and optimism. Wood stacked under imperfect cover in a damp land becomes a moral lesson before it becomes fire. You hear movement in the yard at once, someone dragging, someone muttering, someone discovering that the driest logs are somehow at the bottom. You turn toward the herb beds first. A little rain will do them good. But not all rain comes gently. You crouch beside the newer sowings, checking where the soil is loosest. The onion rows by the south wall are secure enough. The leek should hold. But the smaller bed near the open path may channel water if the runoff comes hard, and that would send your morning's careful work downstream in a muddy, humiliating procession. You fetch the hoe and draw a shallow trench along the edge, just enough to guide excess water away. Then another at the corner where the path dips, not elegant, effective. Most medieval engineering begins exactly there. The breeze freshens, stirring the herb tops and making the hives hum with a lower, more thoughtful note. Bees know weather before most people do, or at least they behave as though they have received better notice. Their flight becomes busier for a few moments, then slackens. You head toward the hives by the orchard wall, checking that the skeps are secure and the covering sit properly. One needs a little weight at the base, so you fetch a flat stone and settle it against the board. Another has shifted slightly on the uneven earth. You nudge it level with careful hands, murmuring something low and pointless, the way people do when handling creatures that can answer disagreement with stings. No one can quite agree whether bees become angrier before rain. Some swear they grow sullen and quick to offence. Others say they are merely busy and tired of human interpretation. It is possible both are true. In any case, you have no wish to test their mood by lingering. You step back and look once more toward the sky. Darker now. The first drop lands on the back of your hand, cold as well water, then another and another. The rain begins without thunder, just a soft pattering at first, a scattering sound over straw, leaves and hard-packed paths. It darkens the dust in spots, stipples the stone near the wall, beads on the cabbage leaves and the fennel fronds. For one brief moment the whole garden smells astonishingly alive. Damp sage, wet earth, bruised thyme, warm stone cooling under water. It is one of those scents so complete it feels less like a smell than a room you've stepped into. You pull your cloak tighter and move quickly down the path, checking the spots most likely to misbehave. The patched trough, still holding, good. The low path by the kitchen herbs, already slick. You scatter a little ash there from the bucket left by the wall, watching it turn to grey paste at first, then begin to grip the mud. The drain by the south bed catches water and carries it off as intended. Better. The little straw cover over the more tender starts has come loose at one corner. So you crouch and pin it down with another stone, rain dripping from your sleeve onto your wrist. The shower thickens. Not a violent downpour, but enough now that the path shines and the wool at your shoulders grows heavy. The dog has vanished, demonstrating once again that his loyalty is strongest in dry conditions. You head for the gatehouse eave near the outer wall, where a narrow overhang offers shelter enough for a person willing to stand close and lower expectations. From here the garden looks transformed. Beds that seemed dusty and dull an hour ago now gleam dark and rich. The cabbage leaves shine like polished leather. The path runs in thin streams. Drops gather on the herb tips, on the bare twigs of the orchard, on the rushes by the threshold. Rain softens the whole place without making it gentle. It is still work. It simply looks prettier while causing inconvenience. A cart rattles past beyond the wall, wheels sucking in the lane mud, and someone curses with heartfelt conviction. You cannot hear the exact words, but the meaning travels clearly enough through tone alone. Rain on a road is always somebody's problem, often more than one person's at once. In the market square it will turn dust to churned clay. At the ford it will deepen the ruts. In the sheds it will tempt rot. And yet every bean, leek, root, herb, and fruit tree in sight is drinking as if the world has finally remembered its manners. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether rain is a blessing or a nuisance, because it is too often both in the same hour. A dry week makes everyone pray for clouds. A wet week makes them inspect the sky like insulted tenants. The truth lies somewhere muddier. You lean beneath the eave and watch the beds receive what they need in the very form that spoils your path, soaks your cloak, and threatens tomorrow's market road. Medieval life rarely presents unmixed gifts. A lay brother hurries from the kitchen side carrying an armful of split wood under his cloak, his tonsure already beaded with water. He spots you beneath the overhang and stops, laughing softly at the sight of you, both pretending this counts as dry. Good for the cabbages, he says, bad for everything else. That is why God made cabbages humble and wood stubborn. He shifts the logs in his arms. Brother Martin says rain falling in the afternoon means clear dawn tomorrow. Brother Martin says many things. Today, perhaps he's right. He ducks onward through the shower toward the service door, and you remain under the eave a little longer, watching the drops strike and merge and run. The garden settles into the rain's rhythm quickly, as if all morning's tasks have been rewritten in water. Birds go quiet. The bells from the priory seem farther off now, blurred by the steady patter. The smell of smoke from the kitchen turns sweeter in the damp. Somewhere in the orchard, water drips from branch to branch with the sound of beads sliding on a string. When the rain eases from steady to light again, you step back into it. The path gives under your boots at once. Mud reaches up like an old friend with poor boundaries. You make one last circuit, because rain always reveals what fair weather politely conceals. The drain trench is holding. The trough remains mostly sound. One edge of the bean bed has slumped slightly, so you shore it with the hoe and press the soil back gently. Near the orchard wall, a little runnel has formed where the path slopes, and you set a broken tile to redirect it away from the rosemary roots. Small interventions, quiet salvations. Even now, it is hard to tell whether half the gardener's skill lies in growing things or in rescuing them from ordinary circumstances. Perhaps the two are the same trade. By the time you finish, the worst of the shower has passed. Drops still fall from the eaves and branch tips, but the sky has lightened a fraction in the west. The whole garden glistens, beds dark and satisfied, straw flattened, tools safe. Your cloak damp through at the shoulders, your hem splashed, your hands cool again. Yet there is satisfaction in this too. You have met the rain halfway. Not conquered it, no one conquers weather with a hoe and a stubborn back, but answered it where you could. You stand in the path and breathe in the wash scent of the place. Wet herb, wet earth, wet wood, a trace of smoke, the clean metallic edge of rain moving off. Behind you, the kitchen clatters on. Ahead of you, the evening tasks are waiting in softened ground. The day has been altered, but not undone. And so you walk slowly back through the dripping garden, boots making soft sucking sounds in the mud, carrying in your body that old familiar lesson that a calm day in the life of a medieval gardener is never truly free of trouble, only full of manageable kinds. And sometimes the manageable kind arrives as rain, cool and inconvenient and absolutely necessary, falling over every bed alike until the whole enclosed world is darker, quieter, and very much alive. When the rain finally passes beyond the priory lands, it leaves the garden altered in all the small ways that matter. Nothing dramatic has happened. No tree split, no wall tumbled, no saint appeared in the bean patch to announce a better season. Instead, the paths lie darker and softer underfoot. The beds have drunk deeply, and every leaf in the enclosed space seems outlined in a finer, cleaner light. The air itself feels rinsed. Wet sage gives off a scent both bitter and comforting. Rosemary along the warm wall releases sharp resin where drops cling to its needles. The cabbages wear beads of water like minor nobles suddenly dressed for supper. Even the broken straw along the path looks, for the moment, almost intentional. You walk slowly back through the plots, hoe in one hand, cloak damp at the shoulders and heavier than you would like. Evening has not arrived yet, but it has announced itself. The sun, now lower, comes out in pale bands from under the retreating cloud and turns the wet ground bronze in places. It is the hour when work grows more reflective. You're still moving, still checking, still mending where needed, but the day has lost its brisk edge. Everything feels quieter after rain. Even the priory bells, as when they ring, seem to land more softly over the beds. This is the time for taking stock. You begin in the long rows near the middle plots, where beans, cabbages and leeks sit in orderly lines now darkened by the shower. Wet soil clings to your boots. At each bed you pause, crouch, look, beans first. Their little stems have held well enough. Though one corner suffered from the runoff more than you liked, you kneel and press the loosened earth back around the roots with the side of your hand. The leaves are small and tender still, the green almost translucent where the light catches through them. Such fragile things, and yet they will climb, twist, flower, and fill baskets if weather and pests and human error all decide. For once, not to be troublesome at the same time. It is asking a great deal. No one can quite agree whether beans fail more often from bad weather or bad luck. Some say a cold night is enough. Others blame spiteful neighbours, badly chosen feast days, or the evil eye cast by someone envious of a tidy plot. There are women who will bury a little piece of iron at the row end against mischief, and men who spit once over the shoulder before sowing. Even now, it is hard to tell whether such habits are safeguards or simply ways of convincing oneself that misfortune has rules. You rise and move to the leeks. Rain has washed them clean, leaving their narrow leaves brighter and more upright. You thin the mud away lightly from one crowded patch and pull free a few late weeds, softened enough now to come willingly. The smell of wet onion rises at once, green and sharp and honest. There is something deeply reassuring in that scent. Leeks ask patience, but they also reward it. They keep company with pottage, broth, sauces, fish, and bread in 100 modest meals. In many households they are less a vegetable than a dependable argument against despair. At the cabbage beds, you stop longer. Cabbages invite inspection because they are always being admired, attacked, or judged. These have taken the rain well, though a few outer leaves show the usual nibble damage. Slugs, snails, perhaps one bold creature with a beak and no respect for boundaries. You lift a leaf and find a snail tucked beneath like a monk avoiding chores. It goes into the weed basket without ceremony. Another clings to the underside of a second plant, and then a third. Rain awakens all sorts of appetite. Some gardeners go out by twilight with lanterns to pick snails one by one after wet weather, muttering vengeance in low voices while the whole garden glows and drips around them. Some swear this is the only reliable method. Others lay ashes, chalk, wool, or broken shells in rings. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. Except on one point, snails are persistent in inverse proportion to their charm. You move onward toward the onion rows you sowed earlier, and there the rain has left the soil beautifully settled. The drills lie dark and level, the surface neither crusted nor washed. You feel a private little satisfaction at that. The trenching held. The runoff went where it was told. The seed, for now, remains where your careful fingers placed it. A gardener learns to treasure these quiet victories because the larger ones are never guaranteed. To have the rows look right after rain is no small comfort. The dog returns at last from his dry refuge, paws suspiciously clean for someone claiming loyalty to the working life. He trots beside you as though he's been present for every crucial decision and now deserves a voice in evaluating results. You glance down at him. You miss the worst of it. He looks up with the serene shamelessness of a creature who knows survival is better than principle. Medieval dogs, like medieval people, are often more practical than heroic. At the edge of the bean patch, you pause and look west. The clouds are breaking apart into long grey veils, and through them the evening light spreads low across the priory grounds. Beyond the wall, a distant cart creaks on the lane, slower now in the mud. From the village farther off comes a burst of faint voices, then nothing. The world is settling again after being briefly inconvenienced. You take up a basket and begin a final gathering among the later beds. A few more leeks that have grown thick enough to come in, some parsley revived by the rain and standing brilliantly green, 2 small cabbages not large enough for a grand table but fine for the kitchen pot, a handful of beans from an early patch in the warmest corner. The garden's evening generosity is always modest, but no less welcome for that. You place each thing carefully in the basket, balancing stems and roots so they do not bruise. Twilight work in a medieval garden has a feeling all its own. The day's labour begins to gather into memory even while your hands are still at it. The bells ring again from the priory, and this time the sound seems to fold through the damp air like cloth being laid over a table. You hear a rook calling from the orchard wall. Water still drips from one gutter in slow intervals. Somewhere behind the kitchen doors a pot lid rattles, and the smell of supper begins to spread onion. Smoke. The faint richness of something simmered long enough to forgive the day. You carry the basket toward the kitchen bench, then turn back once more because stock-taking is never satisfied with one pass. At the herb beds you inspect the mint edge again, still contained, though only just. The sage looks splendid after rain. Silver green turned darker and richer. Rue stands there like a disapproving aunt who has survived every family scandal and remains unimpressed. Fennel bends a little under water weight, but no harm done, in the orchard strip. The pear sapling you watered earlier seems steadier now. The earth firmed around it, a good sign. The hives sit quieting as the air cools. Fewer bees at the entrance now, the day's work narrowing toward rest. No one can quite agree whether bees sleep or merely become still enough to seem holy. Some say a hive at dusk sounds like whispered prayer. Others say it sounds like a household minding its own affairs more efficiently than most humans ever manage. You stand a moment near the skeps and listen to the soft hum sinking deeper into itself. There is comfort in industrious creatures finally quieting. The path by the wall still holds puddles in its lower ruts, and you scatter one last little measure of ash there before the light fails too much to see clearly. A broken tile near the rosemary has shifted, so you set it straight with your boot. These tiny evening corrections matter. Leave them, and tomorrow starts behind. Mend them now, and morning arrives at least slightly less offended. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether the true art of gardening lies in growth or in attention. On a damp evening like this, you suspect attention wins. The plants grow because they must and because the season urges them on, but they survive well, flourish neatly, and become supper because somebody notices a slipped cover, a flooded corner, a snail under a leaf, a wall binding too tight, a trough seam beginning to fail. Gardening is less a contest with nature than a long companionship with details. The sky is dimming fast now, turning from pewter to a softer blue-grey over the priory roofs. Wet stone gives off its cooling smell. The dog shakes himself at last and showers your hem with droplets, which seems ungrateful considering his contribution to the day's labour. You tell him so. He sneezes and walks on. At the kitchen bench, you set down the evening basket and look back across the beds one last time. Beans holding, leeks bright, cabbages mostly untroubled, onion rows settled, herbs fragrant in the damp, paths muddied, yes, and hems wet, and tomorrow's road to market likely unpleasant. But the garden itself has come through the rain in good order. For a medieval gardener, this counts as more than success. It counts as peace for the hour. So you linger there a moment longer in the cool after-rain light, hands smelling of wet parsley and earth, bells drifting from the priory, and the whole garden lying before you dark, ordered and quietly alive. The day is leaning toward evening now, and you can feel the labour in your shoulders and knees, the slow, friendly heaviness of it. Yet beneath the tiredness is something steadier, the calm satisfaction of having watched the weather pass, measured what thrived, what failed, and what needs tomorrow's care, while the little enclosed world of beans and leeks and cabbage leaves settles itself toward night under your patient eye. The evening basket sits on the kitchen bench behind you, damp at the base where the rainwater still clings to the roots, and the garden before you has begun that slow, dim transformation from working ground into something more secretive. Daylight does not vanish all at once in a place like this. It withdraws carefully. First the colour drains from the farthest corners, then the low paths blur into one another, then the wall, the orchard branches, the bean poles, the herb rows, all begin to flatten into darker shapes, as if the whole garden is drawing a wool cloak over its shoulders. The bells ring again from the priory, quieter now in the cooling air, and you know it is time to begin the closing work. Gardens, like storehouses, gates, and hens, do not simply stop at dusk. They must be put by. Tools gathered, latches checked, small vulnerabilities noticed before darkness makes them everybody's regret. You turn from the bench and walk back toward the lean-to, your boots making softer sounds now on the damp path, the mud less troublesome than resigned. The dog follows at your heels, restored to companionship now that the weather has ceased making demands. Under the lean-to roof, everything smells of wet wood and iron. You hang the hoe back in its place, set the rake teeth down against the wall, wipe the hand spade with a bit of sacking, and run an oily rag along the pruning knife before sheathing it. Not much oil, just enough to discourage rust and satisfy the small proud part of you that hates seeing a blade neglected. The line pegs go into the chest, twine back on its peg, the seed box checked once more. Not because anyone has touched it since morning, but because evening creates suspicion in the orderly mind. If a mouse has ambitions, dusk is its hour. No one can quite agree whether mice are more clever than sinful, though opinions on the matter tend to sharpen after a winter spent losing grain. Some swear a barn cat is better than any trap. Others hang bunches of mint or rue, and claim the smell sends vermin off in disgust. A few favour elaborate devices involving bowls, crumbs, and inverted pots, all of which sound as if they were designed by men unwilling to admit a cat had outwitted them. You lift the lid of the chest, peer in, find everything as it should be, and close it again with the latch firm. From there you move toward the outer gate. It is made of oak boards banded in iron, not grand but solid, with a latch that sticks in a damp weather and an iron key heavy enough to feel authoritative. The gate divides the garden from the lane leading toward the road and the town beyond. All day it has stood open to errands, deliveries, kitchen boys, monks with baskets, and the occasional curious soul who pauses just long enough to ask whether the pears will do better this year. Now the lane beyond is already dim. A cart has passed recently, leaving broad ruts in the mud. The wider world is folding inward too. You swing the gate toward you. It drags a little at the bottom where the ground has softened after rain, and the sound is deep and wooden, like an old chest being closed on a season. The iron latch catches with the satisfying clank. Then comes the key, turned slowly, feeling each stubborn notch yield. There is comfort in that small resistance. Locks that turn too easily make a person nervous. You tug once on the gate after the key is out, just to be sure. Garden secure, at least against honest people and moderately ambitious goats. The dog sniffs the bottom edge as if checking your work. You inform him that his trust is touching. He sneezes at the wet wood and sits down. You continue along the inside wall, checking the lower hurdles and wattle divisions that keep kitchen beds distinct from orchard strips, and keep certain animals from deciding the gardener's efforts were laid out for their private refreshment. One hurdle leans more than you like near the cabbage patch, likely where the ground softened under it in the rain. You press your shoulder against it, set it upright again, and push a little wedge of stone at the base, good enough for the night. In the bean row you reset one short support pole that has begun to tilt. Near the herbs, you tuck the straw cover more closely around a tender patch that dislikes chill, pulling the edges in and weighing them with stones. Evening is the hour for such little mercies. As you work, the garden changes tone around you. During the day, every bed feels plainly visible, every task named. But at dusk, shapes begin to suggest rather than declare. The lavender patch turns into a dark, low blur near the wall. The onion rows disappear except where a little moisture still catches the last of the light. The hives become silent domes again. A blackbird hops once across the path and vanishes under a currant bush, somewhere in the orchard. A drip still falls from one branch to another with patient intervals. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether gardens grow stranger after sunset, or whether it is only the mind, tired from work, that starts supplying mysteries. Some swear certain herbs are strongest at dusk, especially those meant for charms, sleep draughts, or easing troublesome dreams. Some say foxglove and mugwort, gathered under the right moon, carry powers no daylight leaf can hold. Others insist dusk simply makes every ordinary thing look slightly enchanted and therefore suspect. In a century that keeps saints' bones in shrines and also hangs garlic in doorways, there is room for both views. You pause by the little carved saint near the wall gate. The weather-dark figure set there years ago by some hand no one now remembers. The rain has left a tiny bead of water on its brow. You wipe it away with your thumb more from habit than devotion. Not because you think the saint minds, but because the gesture feels companionable. People in this world keep company with what they can: dogs, trees, saints, old tools, bees, bells. From the priory windows comes a faint warm glow now. Beeswax candles lit in cells and passages. Their light is softer than tallow, steadier too, and on damp evenings the smell of it drifts out when a shutter opens even for a moment. You hear a door close somewhere inside, then the murmur of voices dimmed by stone. Indoors, people are turning towards supper, prayer, accounts, tired conversation, little bowls of broth, dry benches near the hearth, out here. You are giving the garden the last of your attention before handing it over to the night. You make one more round to the orchard wall, less because it needs it than because parting from a day's work always asks for a backward glance. The pear sapling stands firm, the rosemary by the tile still upright, the skeps quiet. Not silent exactly, never silent but humming now in a low inward way. Some swear that bees pray at dusk. Even now, it is hard to tell whether that says more about bees or about human envy. At the hives you stop and listen. The sound is deep and soft, like a distant room full of whispering. Above them the sky is turning from grey-blue to a richer dark, and one pale star has begun to show where the cloud has finally torn open. In the far lane, someone passes with a lantern, just a brief moving glow between wall slats, then gone. The world narrows pleasantly. You take up the basket of weed scraps and snail shells at last and carry it to the midden beyond the side yard. The smell there is strong, of peelings, straw, ash, dung, and the long alchemy by which waste is persuaded back into usefulness. Nothing elegant, entirely necessary. Tomorrow or next month or next season, this too will return to the beds in another form. Medieval life has very few neat endings. Most things simply change names and smells and continue. On your way back, you stop at the well. The water below reflects only a dim piece of sky now. You lower the bucket, draw up enough to rinse the worst of the mud from your hands, and pour a little over your boots. The water is cold enough to sting. Dirt swirls away in brown threads. Your palms are rough from rope and soil, your nails darkened, your wrists damp where the sleeves have slipped. Honest hands, tired hands, hands that have spent the day persuading little green lives to continue. No one can quite agree whether a well after dusk ought to be approached casually. Some old tales warn of spirits in deep water, or saints who gaze up from wells to judge the impatient, or cleverer, meaner things best not named after dark. Most likely the stories began to keep children from falling in. Still, in the quiet of evening, with the rope creaking and the last light fading from the water, it is easy enough to understand how such tales survive. By the time you return to the main path, the garden has become fully a place of scent and outline. Damp mint, cooling stone, wet straw, the faint sweetness of violets hidden in shadow. The dog waits by the kitchen side as if he has personally overseen all closures and is ready to receive formal thanks. You decline to offer any. He accepts this graciously. You look once more over the enclosed ground gates barred, tools in, covers secured, support set straight, little weaknesses answered before dark. The beds lie hushed beneath the deepening blue, and a faint breeze runs through the bean leaves with the sound of cloth being brushed by a careful hand. There is always more to do tomorrow. There is always some risk left unguarded, some beetle unseen, some board waiting to crack. But for tonight, the garden is closed. So you slip the iron key onto its ring at your belt and turn toward the warmth waiting indoors, leaving behind the shadowed rows and the quiet hives and the old wall keeping its last breath of day. The garden belongs to darkness now, to dew, to roots drinking slowly under the soil, to creatures with smaller feet and stranger business. And you, having locked it well, carry away the calm of that final act, the simple medieval comfort of hearing an oak gate shut, an iron key turn, and knowing for a few dim hours that all within is as safe as hands and habit can make it. The iron key rests against your hip as you leave the darkened garden behind, and the sound of it tapping lightly against your belt follows you through the service yard like a small, metallic reassurance. Night is not complete yet, but it has gathered itself around the priory walls and into the corners of the yard where the rain left shallow puddles, reflecting the first pale hints of starlight. Behind you, the garden lies enclosed and quiet, its herbs and leeks and bean poles now given over to damp air, moonward silence, and the industrious private affairs of roots. Ahead, the kitchen windows cast a warm amber glow across the worn stones, and the smell drifting out is enough to pull even the most tired soul toward the hearth with renewed devotion. You duck inside, lowering your head automatically beneath the lintel, and are met at once by warmth, smoke, and the low, deep comfort of evening food. The kitchen fire has settled into a steadier blaze now, no longer roaring with midday demands, but glowing broad and reliable under the hanging pot. The soot-black rafters hold the day's heat as if reluctant to let it go. Beeswax candles have been lit in niches and on the work table, their small flames softer and cleaner than tallow. Each one making a little pool of gold around itself, the room feels different at this hour, less hurried, more human. The labour has not ended, but it has changed character. The sharp movements of preparation have eased into the tired, companionable motions of finishing and sharing. Maud stands near the hearth with her sleeves rolled, ladling supper into bowls with the solemn concentration of a priestess conducting rites that involve onions, which, in a medieval kitchen, is not far from the truth. A younger helper sets trenchers on the table, while another tears bread from a coarse round loaf, the crust crackling under his hands. The air smells of leek, broth, a little cabbage, smoke, and damp wool slowly drying. It is not the scent of luxury. It is better than that. It is the scent of sufficiency. You hang your cloak near the outer edge of the warmth, where it may steam without catching, and hold your hands briefly toward the fire. The skin across your knuckles feels tight from water and work. Your shoulders have settled into that deep, steady ache earned by the whole day's labour, and now that you stand still, you feel how much of the day has collected in your bones. Still, it is a good kind of tiredness, not panic, not hunger, not fear. Just the body asking to be sat down and fed before it becomes unreasonably poetic about hardship. Maud glances at you and nods toward the bench. Sit before you fall over and become another problem. That would be ungrateful after all the cabbages spared us. It would also be inconvenient. You sit. The bench is hard and a little uneven, but at this hour it might as well be a lord's carved chair. Someone places a wooden bowl into your hands, warm enough that you shift your grip twice before settling. The broth is thicker tonight than at noon, richer with leeks and greens and the little cabbage heads you brought earlier, with a scrap of barley and perhaps the ghost of smoked fish somewhere behind it all. A humble supper, but one touched at every point by the garden you closed not long ago. You can taste the day in it. The onions from the morning beds, the herbs gathered by the wall, the leeks thinned under the soft afternoon light, labour returning to you as warmth. Around the table the room fills slowly, a lay brother with ash still on his sleeve, the young helper from before, now looking pleasantly worn thin, Brother Anselm at last, appearing with tired eyes and a little bunch of dried fennel still tucked into his belt as though he has forgotten he put it there. Two older servants from the outer buildings join as well, speaking in low voices and rubbing their hands before taking their bowls. Supper in such a place is rarely festive on an ordinary night, but it has its own quiet dignity. People sit, steam rises, spoons dip and lift. Bread is broken and passed. Complaints, when they come, are too tired to become serious. The dog, naturally, finds his way to the threshold just in time to appear tragically overlooked by history. No one can quite agree whether feeding dogs from the table encourages loyalty or insolence. Most evidence suggests the answer is yes. Maud pretends not to see him at first, then breaks off a heel of bread and tosses it expertly so that it lands just outside the door. The dog catches it and retires with the solemn air of a creature accepting tribute rightfully owed. Brother Anselm sits opposite you and lifts a spoonful of broth, inhaling the steam before tasting it. "Better than horehound," he says after a moment. "That is a very low standard. It is still a useful one." He sets down the spoon and rubs the bridge of his nose. The porter swears the syrup is helping. Has it? It has certainly sweetened his view of life. That may be cure enough. A few small smiles travel around the table. This is how humour lives here at day's end. Not loud, not bright, just a dry little thread running through the steam and the weariness. Enough to remind everyone that tiredness has not entirely swallowed the soul. Someone farther down the bench mentions that the rain may have softened the road to the market square badly enough to slow the traders tomorrow. Another says the bridge by the mill has been questionable since Candlemas and should never be trusted after an afternoon shower. Another wonders aloud whether the old toll collector at the west gate inflates measures when his boots are wet and his mood worsens. This sparks mild agreement, because all toll collectors are believed to possess a wet-weather soul even in summer. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether monastery suppers are quieter than manor suppers, but that may depend mostly on whether stew is being served and how many people have spent the day outside in rain. Tonight, the kitchen talk is low and unhurried, broken more often by chewing than by speeches. The candlelight trembles on wooden bowls, on the iron pot hook, on the damp sheen still clinging to a sleeve laid too near the fire. In such light, every ordinary object begins to look slightly important. A spoon, a crust, a beeswax taper, the rough grain of the table worn smooth by years of elbows and bowls and winter hands. After a while, one of the older servants, a woman with wrists strong from kneading and hauling, begins speaking of an old custom from her mother's village. They used to hang fennel over the lintel when storms came in from the marsh, she says, tearing bread. Said it kept the worst of the air from entering. Brother Anselm lifts a brow. The air obeyed the fennel, so they said, and if the air did not obey, then they said more fennel was needed. That draws a quiet laugh, but no one mocks the idea too hard. Medieval evenings are full of these little halfway beliefs, habits carried from mother to daughter, from shepherd to cook, from old village to stone priory and back again. Herbs for weather, herbs for fever, herbs for sleep, herbs for envy, herbs for protection, herbs because one dislikes admitting the world is larger than one's remedies. You live in a century that knows both prayer books and charms tied with red thread, and most people are practical enough to refuse neither. Maud returns to the hearth and hangs another small pot near the fire, this one for steeping something bitter-smelling, sage perhaps, or team with a little honey, a night draught for someone coughing in an upper room or shivering in the infirmary. The kitchen continues after supper, always. Bread must be covered, embers banked, boards wiped, pots scoured enough to keep tomorrow from tasting too heavily of today. Labour does not so much stop as lower its voice. You finish the last of the broth and use a piece of bread to chase what remains at the bottom of the bowl. Waste nothing. Not because someone is watching, though someone usually is, but because the day that produced this meal asked too much to allow vanity at the table. Outside, the wind presses lightly against the shutters. You hear the bell again, distant now and gentler than ever, marking another office in the chapel, another measured piece of night sliding into place. Even now it is hard to tell whether the true comfort of supper comes from the food itself or from the fact that nothing more urgent is required of you for a little while. The gate is locked, the beds are covered, the tools are in, the rain has passed, the hives are quiet, the porter is sweetened with horehound and honey. For an hour at least, the world can continue without your hands directly on it. That is its own kind of blessing. A younger helper begins trimming the wicks on the nearer candles with small, careful pinches. Another gathers empty trenchers. Brother Anselm rises first, taking his cup of bitter herbal brew and his tiredness back toward the infirmary. One by one the others drift up, each into the next small duty, or toward whatever corner of warmth the night will permit. Soon only the quieter sounds remain. Maud scraping the pot, a cloth over the table, a spoon set down, the fire settling in the hearth. You remain a moment longer on the bench, hands around a final cup of weak ale warmed near the embers, and let the room settle around you. The candlelight pools softly on the table. The rafters disappear upward into smoke-dark shadow. Your cloak, hanging near the warmth, has nearly dried. The smell of wet wool has faded beneath beeswax and broth and herbs. It would be possible, sitting here, to imagine that the whole world is only this fire, bench, bowl, walls, and the gentle exhaustion after honest work. But outside, beyond the shutters and stone, the garden waits under night, damp paths, closed gate, little rose sleeping in the earth, and because you know it is there, because you have touched every part of it today, the warmth of this room feels fuller, as if the darkness beyond has not been shut out but gently entrusted to itself. At last you rise, return the cup, and take your cloak from its peg. The key at your belt is cool again. The fire glows low. Supper is done. Around you, the kitchen dims into its night rhythm, and you step away carrying in your body the deepest comfort a medieval gardener is likely to know, not luxury, not ease, but food after labour, candlelight after rain, and the small shared peace of a room where everyone has done enough for one day. You leave the kitchen with the last warmth of the hearth still clinging to your sleeves, and the passage beyond feels cooler for it, though not unkindly so. Night has settled properly now over the priory. The yardstones shine faintly where the rain touched them earlier, and the air carries that calm, damp stillness that comes after a day of weather and work have both finally spent themselves. Above the rooftops, the sky has cleared in wide, dark reaches, though a few torn clouds still drift slowly east, pale as worn wool in the moonlight. Somewhere close by, water falls from an eave in patient intervals, a sound so regular it could almost be mistaken for a sleepy clock if clocks in this century had more ambition. The path to your lodging runs beside the outer wall of the closed garden. You take it slowly, not because the distance is great, but because after a full day every step seems to prefer being noticed. The key at your belt gives a soft clink against the iron ring. Your boots, cleaned as well as the well water allowed, still carry the smell of damp leather and garden soil. The dog trails you for a few paces, then peels away towards some other mystery of the yard, perhaps a scrap, perhaps a shadow, perhaps a social obligation among the chickens that he alone understands. The priory windows glow here and there with beeswax light, each small square of gold suspended in the dark stone like a held breath. In one upper chamber, someone moves across the candle glow and vanishes. In another, voices drift faintly and then stop. Farther away, from the chapel, comes the low murmur of prayer, too indistinct to follow but unmistakable in rhythm. Words spoken into night, hours marked not by haste but by repetition, even if you do not kneel among them. Those prayers form part of the atmosphere of your life here, like smoke, bells, and damp straw. They settle into the walls, the roofs, the orchard bark, the very manner in which darkness gathers around the buildings. Then the bell sounds again. It comes from the priory tower, slow and full in the night air, spreading outward over the enclosed grounds and beyond them toward the lane, the meadow, the far road, perhaps even to travellers not yet under any roof. In daylight the bells divide the work. At night they do something gentler. They seem less to order than to remind. Time continues. The dark is not empty. Others are awake with you, or half awake, or lying still beneath wool blankets listening to the same bronze voice move through the cold. No one can quite agree whether night bells comfort people more than they trouble them. Some say the sound keeps evil things from drawing near the walls. Some say wandering spirits dislike consecrated bronze. Some say bells in the dark merely remind the sleepless how very late it is. All may be true. In any case, the bell keeps ringing, and the night, instead of shrinking from it, seems to make room. You stop a moment by the garden wall and rest your palm against the stone. It still holds a trace of the day's warmth near the surface, though cool has already won the deeper argument. Beyond the wall lies the garden. You closed, leeks quiet in their rows, herbs breathing out faint scent into the dew, bean leaves folded into darkness, bees clustered deep in the hives, the little pear sapling standing in its damp ring of soil. You cannot see any of it from here. You know it by memory now, by the map the day has left in your hands and feet and back. Strange how a place becomes more familiar in darkness, not less. Once you've spent enough hours tending it, a gust of wind moves lightly along the passage and brings with it smells from farther off wood smoke from the servants' fire, wet hay from the stable, a whiff of river damp beyond the walls, and the faint sour tang of the midden kept at a respectful but realistic distance from everything important. This is the perfume of a medieval night, not one smell, but many, layered without apology. There are no scented candles here promising lavender meadows and moral superiority. There is simply the truth smoke, mud, wool, beasts, herbs, rain, and the occasional sharp note of something nobody has gotten around to cleaning yet. You continue on and reach the little doorway of your lodging. Inside, the room is much as you left it, though now it feels smaller and more private after the kitchen's candlelit company. The rushes underfoot are dry enough near the hearthside and still faintly damp near the wall. Your oaken chest squats where it stood in the morning. The tools not needed tomorrow wait in their corners like patient old companions. A tallow lamp would do. But tonight you settle for the stub of a beeswax candle saved from a better chamber, gifted or forgotten long ago. You light it carefully, and its flame makes the room seem at once poorer and more gentle. Beeswax light flatters everything. It even flatters walls that would not survive close inspection. You hang your cloak, unlace your boots, and sit for a while on the edge of the low bed stuffed with straw and covered in rough wool blankets. The relief in your feet is immediate and profound, nearly spiritual. A day in the garden is measured not only in bells and tasks, but in the slow accumulation of earth, weight, and distance through the body. Your knees know every kneeling. Your shoulders remember every bucket. Your palms carry the ghost of rope, hoe, pruning knife, and damp stems. Tiredness arrives fully now, no longer held off by supper or movement or the next necessary task. It settles over you like another cloak. From somewhere beyond the wall comes a dog barking once, then twice, then deciding against further commentary. A little later, farther away. Another answers, then silence again. In the stable, a horse stamps. The wind brushes past the eaves with a dry whisper and is gone. Night in a place like this is never perfectly still, but its sounds grow larger because they are fewer. Each one stands alone for a moment, as if the dark has set a little candle around it. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether midnight roads are truly haunted or merely full of ordinary things heard at the wrong hour. A branch against a shrine becomes a hand. A fox cry becomes a woman weeping. Hooves in fog become a rider with no face. In a world lit mostly by flame and memory, darkness does a good deal of composing on its own. You have heard all the old talk of spirits lingering near crossroads, of saints protecting travellers who sleep with pilgrim badges under their cloaks, of women who hang rosemary by the door so that troublesome dreams lose their way on the threshold. None of it feels entirely foolish on a damp night when the wind shifts and the bell sounds over wet stone. You lie back at last, not fully under the blankets yet, and let the body ease itself into the straw mattress. It crackles softly, smells of dry grass and old sleep. Above, the rafters disappear into shadow. The candle flame bends once in the draught and then steadies. Beside the bed sits your chest with its blurred wax tablet, its seed sacks, its twine and knife, and tomorrow folded inside it. Tomorrow is already waiting there in small practical forms. More watering, perhaps, more weeding. A basket for market if the road allows, fennel for Brother Anselm, a hinge to tighten on the gate, mint to scold back into its boundary. The world never truly empties its list. And yet tonight it feels far away. The bell rings again, more distant now through the thickness of the walls and your growing drowsiness. You think of the garden hearing it too, if gardens hear anything at all. Of the hives settled in their dark straw domes, of the pear tree trained to the wall, of rainwater sinking deeper into the rows you sowed, of slugs beginning their ridiculous nighttime confidence, of the saint carving by the gate with its worn little face turned toward weather, theft, prayer, and seasons alike. The whole enclosed ground lies beyond your sight but not beyond your mind, and that thought becomes strangely soothing. It is there, it is quiet, it is held, for now, by stone, darkness, habit, and a locked oak gate. Even now, it is hard to tell whether peace is something a person finds or something a person builds through repeated small acts. A bed made, a tool cleaned, a gate locked, a supper shared, a candle lit, a wall checked once more before sleep. Perhaps peace in this century is never grand enough to announce itself. Perhaps it comes only in these modest forms and asks to be recognized by the tired. The candle has burned lower. Wax gathers in a pale pool at its base and sends up that sweet clean scent bees leave behind in human rooms. Your eyes grow heavy. The room softens around the edges. Outside, the priory continues its slow night bells, prayers, footsteps in distant passages. A shutter moved against the breeze, some brother coughing, some sleeper turning under blankets, some horse shifting its weight in straw. No great events, no revelation, just the ordinary. Watchful life of stone buildings holding human bodies through the dark. You draw the blanket up over your shoulder and let your breath lengthen. The day loosens, one detail at a time. Wet earth, sage on your fingers, rope burn, pottage steam, rain on the path, bees at the hive mouth, the clank of the iron latch. Each memory drifts a little farther off, not lost, just settling. Night sounds continue beyond the walls, dog, wind, distant footsteps, the fading bell, and you listen to them with that half-curious, half-sleepy wonder peculiar to old places, where every sound seems to belong both to this moment and to 100 others that came before it. And there in the quiet, between the last candle glow and the first true pull of sleep, you lie still and listen, while the medieval night goes on beyond the walls, full of old stories, saintly protections, doubtful superstitions, and the ordinary comfort of knowing that for all its shadows, this small corner of the world is held together tonight by stone, habit, and the gentle endurance of those who keep watch until morning. Hey guys, tonight is no longer something you are stepping into for the first time, because by now the whole day has passed through your hands and settled quietly behind your eyes. You lie beneath rough wool with the smell of dry straw under you, smoke caught faintly in the rafters above, and the last sweetness of beeswax candle curling through the little room like a memory reluctant to leave. Beyond the wall, the garden rests where you left it, damp with the day's rain and dark beneath the slow rise of moonlight. Somewhere in the yard a chain shifts softly. Somewhere farther off, a horse lets out a long, warm breath into the cold, and from the priory tower the bells move again through the night, low and steady over stone, mud, and sleeping roofs. Medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience, because the part they never mention is how much of life is made of tired feet, soot-black beams, stiff fingers, and wondering whether your cloak will ever fully dry. You probably would not last a week out here, though after a day like this you may be beginning to suspect that neither comfort nor peace has ever had much to do with softness. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while the night settles around us, comment your location and local time, so that this little walled medieval garden can rest for a moment beside your own evening, wherever you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You do not sleep at once. Medieval sleep is rarely a clean fall into darkness. It comes in layers, loosening one knot of thought after another, so you lie still and listen as the room grows quieter, and in that quiet the day returns to you, not as labour anymore, but as a procession of small, earth-coloured images, the frost before dawn silvering the edges of the beds, the smell of turned soil rising under the first blows of the spade, seeds dry in your palm, no bigger than specks, each one carrying its own stubborn little future, rope biting your shoulder at the well, water trembling in a wooden bucket, sage beneath your fingers, bees waking slowly in their straw-woven houses, a bowl of pottage warming your hands, rain darkening the paths, the clank of the garden gate as evening closed around it like a lid. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether a day's work leaves the body more tired or the mind more settled. Tonight, as you lie with your hands folded over the blanket and your boots finally off, it feels as though the answer is both. Your shoulders carry the memory of the yoke. Your palms remember the grain of tool handles and the slickness of wet stems. Your back knows every kneeling, every rising, every careful stoop between rows. Yet the mind, oddly enough, is softer now than it was at dawn. The little frets of the day, whether the onion rows would wash, whether the trough would hold, whether the rain would come too hard, whether the kitchen would want more than the beds could spare, have all been answered, as much as they can be answered for one night. Tomorrow may ask them again, but tonight they rest. You turn your head slightly toward the wall where the candle has burned down to a stub and gone out. Moonlight has taken over what little work remains, laying a faint pale shape across the floor rushes and catching the iron band of the chest. The room is plain enough that moonlight does not know what to flatter, and so flatters everything equally. The folded cloak on its peg, the ashwood handle of a tool, the worn edge of the chest lid, the blanket rising faintly with your breath. In a richer chamber there might be carved panels, embroidered coverlets, a painted saint's image bright enough to watch over sleep with more ceremony. Here there is only usefulness, and at this hour usefulness looks kind. Beyond the wall the garden lies under that same moon, though you cannot see most of it. Still, memory makes its own lantern. You know where the bean rows run, where the sage keeps its place by the warm stone, where the hives rest near the orchard border, where the little saint carving darkens in the damp, where the path dips and collects rain, where the rosemary holds against the wall, where the onion drills lie sleeping under settled soil. There is comfort in knowing a place so well that darkness cannot remove it. Some swear that gardens do a secret kind of growing at night, when human hands are absent and roots are left to their old silent business. Even now, it is hard to tell whether that is truth or simply a way of admitting that not everything belongs to labour. From the priory comes another low sound, not a bell this time, but footsteps in some upper passage, muffled by stone and distance. Then a cough, then quiet again. Someone else keeps an hour different from yours tonight. A brother rising for prayer, a patient turning in the infirmary, a sleepy servant banking embers. The world does not fully sleep all at once. It only dims in parts, as villages do, as gardens do, as the mind does when it finally begins to drift. You think, for a moment, of the old sayings heard all your life around herbs, wells, walls, and weather. That rosemary keeps bad dreams from the bed. That rue by the door turns away ill luck. That bees must be told the sorrows of a household, or they take offence. That beans sown on the wrong saint's day grow with a twist in them. That bells in the night trouble what ought not walk too near consecrated ground. No one can quite agree whether any of it is true. But perhaps truth is not always the only work such beliefs do. They make a person feel companioned. They stitch the seen and unseen together with enough thread to get through winter, in a century where so much depends on weather, illness, harvest, and chance. A little pattern laid over uncertainty is its own sort of mercy. The dog barks once outside, then stops, as if reminded that the hour no longer welcomes speeches. A wind passes lightly along the wall and brushes the eaves. Somewhere water still drips, slower now than before. The stable answers with a low shifting sound, the wooden creak of a beast changing its weight in straw. All these noises would be ordinary by day. At night they become separate and gentle, each one stepping into the silence, leaving its mark and fading again. Your breathing lengthens. The room grows less distinct. The edges of the chest, the peg, the wall beam, all soften. And with that softening comes the deeper realization of the day itself, not any single task, but the shape of it, movement and rest, cold and warmth, mud and broth, bell and silence, handfuls of seed and handfuls of herbs, rain over the beds and candlelight over the table. A calm day in the life of a medieval gardener is never empty. It is full in the quietest ways, full of small attentions, full of things that must be done before they become larger troubles, full of humble objects that matter more than anyone says aloud: iron keys, ash buckets, straw covers, wooden troughs, old baskets lined with clean rushes, a bit of twine saved because it may become tomorrow's necessity. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether such a life is hard or peaceful. It is certainly hard. The cold gets in. The damp never entirely leaves. The earth answers only after long patience, and often not kindly. Yet peace is there too, hidden not in ease but in rhythm, in doing what the hour asks, in hearing the bell and knowing where you stand, in warming your hands over supper after rain, in closing the gate at dusk and trusting the dark for a little while, in lying down with tired limbs and knowing that every bed, hive, herb patch, and little wool-bound corner has received what care it could from you. And perhaps that is enough, not grandeur, not certainty, enough. The night deepens. The moon climbs a little higher, and the pale strip on the floor shifts toward the far wall. You no longer follow it. Thought has become softer now, less like words and more like drifting images, a bee returning to its hive mouth, parsley thinned into a neat little bundle on the bench, Maud's ladle in the pottage pot, Brother Anselm with fennel caught in his belt, rain on the rosemary tile, a rook watching with black, judgmental patience from the wall, the gate shutting, the key turning, the sound of bells moving over wet stone and fields beyond. And as those images begin to loosen and blur, the whole medieval world that held you through the day starts to settle too. The priory dims, the kitchen hearth falls low, the orchard keeps its own silence, herbs breathe sweetness into the dark, the well holds a cold square of sky, the garden rests under the moon with its roots drinking slowly below the surface and its leaves quiet under dew. You rest with it, as much a part of that small enclosed world as the path or the wall or the hives. So now the pacing slows, and the room grows still, and your breath moves in and out with no need to hurry, while the night gathers itself more gently around the priory stones, around the damp beds, around the oaken gate and the sleeping bees, and the narrow paths where your boots passed so many times today. There is nothing left to lift, nothing left to tie, nothing left to mend before morning. The tools are in, the herbs are cut, the water has been drawn, the rain has passed. The supper bowls are emptied, the bells, when they come again, seem farther away, softer, as though even bronze has grown sleepy. And in that softening, with the wool blanket warm now over your shoulder and the straw beneath you no longer sharp but simply there, the world begins to feel smaller in the kindest possible way. Not closed in, only held by walls, by habit, by old prayers whispered in stone corridors, by little superstitions tied into herb bundles, by the memory of the sun that touched the garden wall, and the rain that darkened the paths, and the fire that warmed the kitchen when evening came. Held by all the small repeated acts that make a life bearable and sometimes beautiful. So you let the last clear thoughts drift away. You let the garden keep itself until dawn. You let the shadows settle in their corners. You let the bells become part of the distance. You let the medieval day, with all its mud and rosemary and leeks and quiet patience, fold itself around you like another blanket until even that too fades into stillness. And at last the little room, the priory, the wall, the orchard, the hives, the rain-washed beds, the murmuring night beyond them all, sink gently into quiet darkness. The night is deeper now, and everything that seemed so solid through the day begins to soften at its edges. The garden wall no longer feels like a boundary so much as a shelter. The tools in their places, the closed gate, the settled beds, the quiet hives, the cooling hearths, all of it seems to breathe in one slow rhythm, as though the whole little world is resting at last. You do not need to watch it anymore. You do not need to plan the next bucket, the next row, the next bundle of herbs. The work has been set down. The earth will keep its own counsel until dawn. Your body grows heavier in the gentlest way, sinking into straw and wool and warmth that is no longer from fire alone, but from simple tiredness, from supper, from shelter, from the reassuring knowledge that the day asked what it asked, and you answered it as well as you could. Outside, there may still be wind moving along the stone, a late footstep in a passage, a sleepy shift from the stable, the faintest stir of leaves in the orchard, but none of it asks anything from you now. Those sounds are only part of the great soft fabric of night, threading themselves through the dark and then passing on. The herbs beyond the wall will gather dew, the roots will hold their place in the cool earth, the bees will remain folded together in their quiet cluster, even the little puddles in the path will grow still, reflecting moonlight where the clouds have cleared. Nothing needs to hurry, nothing needs to prove itself. The whole garden and all the stone around it seems wrapped in patience. And you, at the centre of this calm, can let go a little more with every breath. The old stories fade, the bells grow faint, the mud, the rain, the cold dawn, the warm pottage, the scent of sage on your fingers, all of it drifts together into one long, soft memory. The medieval world that held you for a day does not vanish. It simply dims, like a candle lowered, like footsteps receding, like a voice growing quieter beside the fire. So rest now. Let the dark be kind. Let the night keep watch. Let the garden sleep beneath its veil of mist and moonlight, and let yourself sink with it into a silence that is warm, untroubled, and deep.